Daenerys' time in Carf serves as sort of an interlude between her AGOT arc and ASOS arc. Some people believe it to be pointless filler, whereas I, a biased extremist, choose to see it as her making a pause to contemplate her role in the world and learn lessons that will become paramount in her next arc. As Xaro puts it, Carf is the center of the world, the gate between north and south, the bridge between east and west, ancient beyond memory of man. It would certainly be good if this was how the show adapted The Clash of Kings in Season 2, but it wasn't the case, as we are all well aware of. Hence, Denis' continued journey in Season 3 lacks this crucial component. The magic and prophecies were disregarded, and Carf was just a bus stop to fill up screen time. This will continue to deeply influence the choices she makes in Season 3. While it indeed is more book accurate, the patterns we already had well established will continue to follow. Here's a reminder, this is part 3 of the analysis between show versus book Daenerys. In order to fully grasp it, I encourage you to start with part 1, continue on to part 2, and then return here, so that you have a full picture. Before we start, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share, so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Also, you can listen to this on Spotify if you prefer. Check the link in the description. Before we move on to Storm proper, we will tackle some scenes from Clash that got moved into Season 3. Namely, the assassination attempt on Daenerys at Carf's Harbor. But first, I want to show you what happens earlier. As they made their way towards the next quay, Ser Jorah laid a hand against the small of her back. "Your Grace, you are being followed. No, do not turn." He guided her gently towards a brass seller's booth. "This is a noble work, my queen," he proclaimed loudly, lifting a large platter for her inspection. "See how it shines in the sun?" The brass was polished to a high sheen. Then he could see her face in it, and when Ser Jorah angled it to the right, she could see behind her. "I see a fat brown man and an older man with a staff. Which is it?" "Both of them," Ser Jorah said. "They have been following us since we left Quicksilver." The ripples in the brass stretched the stranger squarely, making one man seem long and gaunt, the other immensely squat and broad. "A most excellent brass, great lady," the merchant exclaimed. "Bright as the sun, and for the Mother of Dragons, only 30 honors. The platter was worth no more than 3. "Where are my guards?" Dany declared. "This man is trying to rob me." For Jorah, she lowered her voice and spoke in the common tongue. "They may not mean me ill. Men have looked at women since time began. Perhaps it is no more than that." The brass seller ignored their whispers. 30? Did I say 30? Such a fool I am. The price is 20 honors. "All the brass in this booth is not worth 20 honors, Dany told him as she studied the reflections. The old man had the look of Westeros about him, and the brown-skinned one must weigh 20 stone. The usurper offered a lordship to the man who kills me, and these two are far from home. Or could they be creatures of the warlocks, meant to take me unawares? 10 Khaleesi, because you are so lovely. Use it for a looking-glass. Only brass this fine could capture such beauty. It might serve to carry night soil. If you threw it away, I might pick it up, so long as I did not need to stoop. But pay for it." Then he shoved the platter back into his hands. "Worms have crawled up your nose and eaten your wits." 8 honors, he cried. "My wives will beat me and call me a fool, but I am a helpless child in your hands. Come, 8, that is less than it is worth. 2 honors, 2. The merchant was panting heavily from the effort of running backward. "Pay him before he kills himself," Dany told Ser Jorah, wondering what she was going to do with a huge brass platter. This scene is minor, but I find it important. It gives us something that show Dany lacks. Humor. Actress Emilia Clarke read the books and reported that she wanted that aspect of Daenerys highlighted, but showrunners Benioff and Weiss usually said no. The actor, who became a household name for portraying Daenerys Targaryen in HBO's epic fantasy series for 8 seasons, actually fought back against the producers of the show when they tried to make her character too cold and expressionless. It's like Daenerys' calling card became called expressionlessness. I always wanted to infuse that with some humanity because no one's consistently like that, the actress revealed, adding that she would sometimes fight back a little. She went on to add that she got it that Daenerys' character had to be unforgiving and a powerful force, but there were moments she felt that the character was also a human being, and so would try to incorporate it into the scenes and hope that it made it to the final cut. This is also yet another thing that debunks the argument that 4-time Emmy nominee Emilia Clarke is a bad actress. No, she was directed to show very little emotional range and remain stoic and emotionless. There's only so little you can do when your own showrunners prevent you from smiling and crying. Now onto the actual assassination attempt. In the show, it happens already in Astapor.
I owe you my life, sir.
The honor is mine, my queen.
You know this man?
I know him as one of the greatest fighters the Seven Kingdoms has ever seen, and as the Lord Commander of Robert Baratheon's Kingsguard.
King Robert is dead. I've been searching for you, Daenerys Stormborn, to ask your forgiveness. I was sworn to protect your family. I failed them. I am Barristan Selmy, Kingsguard to your father. Allow me to join your Queen's Guard, and I will not fail you again.
This scene plays out similarly in the books, but there are several key differences there as well. A Carthin stepped into her path. Mother of Dragons, for you. He knelt and thrust a javel box into her face. Bunny took it almost by reflex. The box was carved wood, its mother of pearl lid inlaid with jasper and chalcedony. You are too generous. She opened it. Within was a glittering green scabbard carved from onyx and emerald. Beautiful, she thought. This will help me pay for our passage. As she reached inside the box, the man said, I am so sorry. But she hardly heard. The scarab with a hiss. Danny caught a glimpse of a malign black face, almost human, and an argent tile dripping venom. And then the box flew from her hand in pieces, turning end over end. Sudden pain twisted her fingers. As she cried out and clutched her hand, the brass merchant let out a shriek, a woman screamed, and suddenly the Cathin were shouting and pushing each other aside. Ser Jorah slammed past her, and Danny stumbled to one knee. She heard the hiss again. The old man drove the butt of his staff into the ground. Aggo came riding through an exiler's stall and vaulted from his saddle. Drogo's whip cracked overhead. Ser Jorah slammed the eunuch over the head with the brass platter. Sailors and horse and merchants were fleeing or shouting or both. Your Grace, 1,000 pardons. The old man knelt. It's dead. Did I break your hand? She closed her fingers, wincing. I don't think so. I had to knock it away. He started, but her blood riders were on him before he could finish. Aggo kicked his staff away and Drogo seized him round the shoulders, forced him to his knees, and pressed a dagger to his throat. Khaleesi, we saw him strike you. Would you see the color of his blood? Release him. Then we climbed to her feet. Look at the bottom of his staff, blood of my blood. Ser Jorah had been shoved off his feet by the eunuch. She ran between them as Arak and Longsword both came flashing from their sheaths. Put down your steel. Stop it. Your Grace. Mormont lowered his sword only an inch. These men attacked you. They were defending me. Then he snapped her hand to shake the sting from her fingers. It was the other one, the Carthin. When she looked around, he was gone. He was a sorrowful man. There was a manticore in that javel box he gave me. This man knocked it out of my hand. The brass merchant was still rolling on the ground. She went to him and helped him to his feet. Were you stung? No, good lady, he said, shaking, or else I would be dead. But it touched me, aye. When it fell from the box, it landed on my arm. He had soiled himself, she saw, and no wonder. She gave him a silver for his trouble and sent him on his way before she turned back to the old man with the white beard. Who is it that I owe my life to? You owe me nothing, your Grace. I am called Arstan, though Belvas named me Whitebeard on the voyage here. Though Drogo had released him, the old man remained on one knee. Aggo picked up his staff, turned it over, cursed softly in the Thraki, scrubbed the remains of the manticore off on a stone, and handed it back. And who is Belvas? She asked. The huge brown eunuch swaggered forward, sheathing his arak. I am Belvas. Strong Belvas they named me in the fighting pits of Meereen. Never did I lose. He slapped his belly, covered with scars. I let each man cut me once, before I kill him. Count the cuts, and you will know how many strong Belvas has slain. Dany had no need to count the scars. There were many, she could see at glance. And why are you here, strong Belvas? From Meereen I am sold to Qohor, and then to Pentos, and the fat man with sweet sting in his hair. He is who was sent strong Belvas back across the sea, and old Whitebeard to serve him. The fat man with sweet sting in his hair. Illyrio, she said. You were sent by Magister Illyrio. "We were, your grace," old Whitebear replied. "The Magister begs your kind indulgence for sending us in his stead, but he cannot sit a horse as he did in his youth, and sea travel upsets his digestion." Earlier he had spoken in the Valerian of the Free Cities, but now he changed to the common tongue. "I regret if we caused you alarm. If truth be told, we were not certain. We expected someone more regal." Dany laughed. She had no dragon with her, and her raiment was hardly queenly. "You speak the common tongue well, Arstan. Are you of Westeros?" "I am. I was born on the Dornish marches, your grace. As a boy I squired for a knight of Lord Swan's household." He held his tall staff upright beside him like a lance, in need of a banner. "Now I squire for Belfast." "A bit old for such, aren't you?" Ser Jorah had shouldered his way to her side, holding the brass platter awkwardly under his arm. Belfast's hard head had left it badly bent. "Not too old to serve my liege, Lord Mormont. You know me as well. I saw you fight a time or two. At Lannisport were you near unhorsed the Kingslayer, and on Pike there as well. You do not recall, Lord Mormont?" Ser Jorah frowned. "Your face seems familiar, but there were hundreds at Lannisport and thousands on Pike. And I am no lord. Bear Island was taken from me. I am but a knight of my Queen's Guard," Dany took his arm, "and my true friend and good counselor." She studied Arstan's face. He had a great dignity to him, a quiet strength she liked. "Rise, Arstan Whitebeard. Be welcome, strong Belfast. Ser Jorah, you know, Coago and Cojogo are blood of my blood. They crossed the Red Ways with me, and so my dragons born." There are notable absences in the show's version of events. Ago and Jogo never made it to screen. We don't know what happened to unnamed Bloodrider and Kovaro. At that point, Dany does not have Bloodriders anymore, and while the Dothraki do travel with her, they have no significance anymore, especially since Jiqui was cut after one scene in Season 1 and Iri was killed off. There are some rightful complaints about how Jogo, Ago and Rakaro have been written in the books. They don't have personalities and can only be differentiated by the type of weapon they use. True enough, but is it an excuse to just cut them completely? The show could have developed them the way they developed and completely changed Jorah, no? Another absence is strong Belvas, a eunuch warrior sent to Dany by Illyrio. Belvas largely serves as a comic relief, but has two important roles as the series progresses: the defeat of the champion of Meereen and getting poisoned by locusts. One will later be given to Dario and the other will not happen at all, so it's not a problem, I suppose. The third absence is Arstan Whitebeard. I don't think it's a spoiler to anyone that Arstan is actually Barristan Selmy. The show decided to omit this aspect of the story in one of the first but not last instances of simplifying Dany's storyline. The purpose of Arstan hiding his identity will impact both characters of Jorah and Dany further down the line. We will discuss examples as we go further. "Belfast has the truth of us, your grace," said Arstan. "We were told to find you and bring you back to Pentos. The Seven Kingdoms have need of you. Robert the Usurper is dead and the realm bleeds. When he set sail from Pentos, there were 4 kings in the land, and no justice to be had." Joy bloomed in her heart, but Dany kept it from her face. "I have 3 dragons," she said, "and more than 100 in my Kalasar, with all their goods and horses." "It is no matter," boomed Belfast. "We take all." The fat man hires 3 ships for his little silver-haired queen. "It is so, your grace," Arstan Whitebeard said. "The great cock, Saduleon, is berthed at the end of the quay, and the galleys Summer Sun and Josu Sprang are anchored beyond the breakwater." 3 heads has the dragon, Dany thought, wondering. "I shall tell my people to make ready to depart at once, but the ships that bring me home must bear different names." "As you wish," said Arstan. "What names would you prefer?" "Vhagar," Daenerys told them, "Miraxis, and Balerion. Find the names on the hulls in golden letters, 3 feet high, Arstan. I want every man who sees them to know the dragons are returned." So just like we do not get the scene of Dany naming her dragons, we also don't get the scene of her renaming the ships after the dragons of Aegon the Conqueror and his wives. In the show, the Undying never tell Daenerys of the 3 heads of the dragon, and the textual parallels between Dany and Aegon are not highlighted. I don't think show Dany ever talks about her family, much less the trio of conquerors, but the textual parallel is important in the books. Since Dany is a gendered subversion, she is the sender of the 3 heads, just like Aegon was one, and she will, in time, start getting compared favorably to the man. I find this important because the discourse around Daenerys always compares her to the worst people of her family, even though the text itself only ever draws comparisons between the Conqueror and Rhaegar. The scene of Barristan's reveal happens chronologically by the end of Season 3, Episode 1, So now we need to go back to compare Daenerys' journey from Karth to Astapor in the books and in the pilot of season 3.
Growing fast.
Not fast enough. I can't wait that long. I need an army.
We'll be an Astapor by night. Some say the Unsullied are the greatest soldiers in the world.
The greatest slave soldiers in the world. Distinction means a good deal to some people.
Do those people have any better ideas about how to put you on the Iron Throne?
It's too beautiful a day to argue.
You're right.
Another lovely day in the high seas.
Don't mock them. They're the first Dothraki who've ever been on a ship. They followed me across the poison water. If they'll do it, others will, and with a true Khalasar.
The Dothraki followed strength above all, Khaleesi. You'll have a true Khalasar when you prove yourself strong, and not before.
I don't think Dany needs to be reminded that the Dothraki follow only strength. I also don't see her book counterpart just snapping her Jorah like that and getting convinced that she could get some Khalasar behind her just like that. Most of the Dothraki would be against her as well. Khal Drogo's claws led Khalasars of their own now, and none of them would hesitate to attack her own little band on sight, to slay and enslave her people, and drag Dany herself back to Vaes Dothrak to take her proper place among the withered crowns of the Doshkalim. What gets omitted is Dany's joy at being at the sea, as well as her recollections about Viserys. Across the still blue water came the slow steady boat of drums and the soft swish of oars from the galleys. The great cog groaned in their wake, the heavy lines stretched on between. Valerion's sails hung limp, dropping forlorn from the masts. Yet even so, as she stood upon the forecastle, watching her dragons chase each other across the cloudless blue sky, Daenerys Targaryen was as happy as she could ever remember being. The narrow sea was often stormy, and Dany had crossed it 100 times as a girl, running from one free city to the next, half a step ahead of the usurpers' hired knives. She loved the sea. She liked the sharp salty smell of the air and the vastness of horizons bounded only by a vault of azure sky above. It made her feel small, but free as well. She liked the dolphins that sometimes swam along beside Balerion, slicing through the waves like silvery spears, and the flying fish they glimpsed now and again. She even liked the sailors, with all their songs and stories. Once on a voyage to Bravos, as she'd watched the crew wrestle down a great green sail in a rising gale, she had even thought how fine it would be to be a sailor. But when she told her brother, Viserys had twisted her hair until she cried. "You are blood of the dragon," he had screamed at her. "A dragon, not some smelly fish." He was a fool about that, and so much else, Dany thought. If he had been wiser and more patient, it would be him sailing west to take the throne that was his by rights. Viserys had been stupid and vicious, she had come to realize. Yet sometimes she missed him all the same. Not the cruel weak man he had become by the end, but the brother who had sometimes let her creep into his bed, the boy who told her tales of the Seven Kingdoms, and talked of how much better their lives would be once he claimed his crown. Daenerys reminiscence about Viserys a lot, but in the show he is all but forgotten by her and the narrative. It's important to note that in spite of how evil and vicious Viserys was, he was not always like this, and Dany wants to remember him as the boy he was in her early childhood, not the man he became by the end. I feel like Jorah and Daenerys reminiscing about Viserys together would have made for a better scene than repeating the obvious that the Dothraki follow only strength. With Arslan present on board, we get some exposition of the Targaryen dragons thanks to him. "How big will they grow?" Dany asked curiously. "Do you know? In the Seven Kingdoms, there are tales of dragons who grew so huge that they could pluck giant krakens from the seas." Dany laughed. "That would be a wondrous sight to see." "It is only a tale, Khaleesi," said her exile knight. "They talk of wise old dragons living 1,000 years as well." "Well, how long does a dragon live?" She looked up as Viserion swooped low over the ship, his wings beating slowly and steering the limp sails. Sir Jorah shrugged. "A dragon's natural span of days is many times as long as a man's, or so the songs would have us believe. But the dragons the Seven Kingdoms knew best were those of House Targaryen. They were bred for war, and in war they died. It is no easy thing to slay a dragon, but it can be done." The squire Whitebird, standing by the figurehead with one lean hand curled about his tall hardwood staff, turned towards them and said, "Balerion the Black Dread was 200 years old when he died during the reign of Jaehaerys the Conciliator. He was so large he could swallow an Oros whole. A dragon never stops growing, your grace, as long as he has food and freedom. His name was Arstan, but strong Belvas had named him Whitebird for his pale whiskers, and most everyone called him that now. He was taller than Ser Jorah, though not so muscular. His eyes were pale blue, his long beard as white as snow and fine as silk. Freedom? Asked Dany, curious. What do you mean? In King's Landing, your ancestors raised an immense domed castle for their dragons. The Dragon Pit, it is called. It still stands atop the hill of Hernaiz, though all in ruins now. That was where the royal dragons dwelt in days of yore, and a cavernous dwelling it was, with iron doors so wide that 30 knights could rise through them abreast. Yet even so, it was noted that none of the pit dragons ever reached the size of their ancestors. The Mhysers say it was because of the walls around them, and the great door above their heads. If walls could keep us small, peasants would all be tiny, and kings as large as giants, said Ser Jorah. I've seen huge men born in hovels, and dwarves who dwell in castles. Men are men, Whitebird replied. Dragons are dragons. The passage gets a new dimension now that we have fire and blood to confirm it. Building the Dragon Pit was a bad idea. It did stand the growth of dragons and limited their freedom. It's also worth noting that dragons and dragons dwelt in the Dragonmond, which was a volcano, around the source of the heat, from which they most likely draw strength and vitality. The Dragon Pit did not have that, as King's Landing was not volcanic. And overall, dragons are not meant to be in chains. I'm speaking to you, Rhaenyra. The first traces of whitewashing and altering of Jorah have been laid in Season 2, and arguably in Season 1 as well. In the show, Jorah and Barristan share an amicable relationship. In the book, Jorah has a one-sided beef with him, as he tends to have with every man around Dany's presence, which ties back to his grooming of Daenerys. Ser Jorah snorted his disdain. How profound. The exiled knight had no love for the old man. He made that plain from the first. He glanced at Ser Jorah. Or a lady's favor, knotted around an arm. Mormont's face darkened. Be careful what you say, old man. Arstan had seen Ser Jorah fight at Lannisport, Dany knew. In the tourney, Mormont had won with a lady's favor knotted round his arm. He had won the lady too, the niece of House Hightower, his second wife, high-born and beautiful. But she had ruined him, and abandoned him, and the memory of her was bitter to him now. Be gentle, my knight. She put a hand on Jorah's arm. Arstan had no wish to give offense, I'm certain. As you say, Khaleesi. Ser Jorah's voice was grudging. Ser Jorah watched with a frown on his blunt, honest face. Mormont was big and burly, strong of jaw and thick of shoulder. Not a handsome man by any means, but as true a friend as Dany had ever known. You would be wise to take that old man's words well salted, he told her when Whitebird was out of earshot. A queen must listen to all, she reminded him. The highborn and the low, the strong and the weak, the noble and the venal. One voice might speak you false, but in many there is always truth to be found. She had read that in a book. Hear my voice then, your grace, the exile said. This Arstan Whitebird is playing you false. He is too old to be a squire, and too well spoken to be serving that oath of a eunuch. What also gets omitted is the discussion of Rhaegar, which contributes to the man's very weak presence in the show. In the book, Rhaegar is mentioned very often by different people, and he is positively compared to Daenerys a lot. But the show omits many details about him. Rhaegar is one of the most disliked minor characters, and I also attribute it to the show only highlighting him when Oberyn discussed him, though in the books I don't recall Oberyn ever mentioning him. Did you know my brother Rhaegar as well? It was said that no man ever knew Prince Rhaegar, truly. I had the privilege of seeing him in tourney, though, and often heard him play his harp with its silver strings. Ser Jorah snorted, along with 1,000 others at some harvest feast. Next you will claim you squired for him. I make no such claim, sir. Miles Smoot was Prince Rhaegar's squire, and Richard Lonmouth after him. When they won their spurs, he knighted them himself, and they remained his close companions. Young Lord Connington was dear to the prince as well, but his oldest friend was Arthur Dane. "The sword of the morning," said Dany, delighted. Viserys used to talk about his wondrous white blade. He said Sir Arthur was the only knight in the realm who was our brother's peer. Whitebird bowed his head. "It is not my place to question the words of Prince Viserys." "King," Dany corrected. "He was a king, though he never reigned. Viserys, the third of his name." "But what do you mean?" His answer had not been one that she'd expected. Ser Jorah named Rhaegar the last dragon once. He had to have been a peerless warrior to be called that, surely. "Your Grace," said Whitebird. "The Prince of Dragonstone was a most puissant warrior, but—" "Go on," she urged. "You may speak freely to me." "As you command." The old man leaned upon his hardwood staff, his brow furrowed. "A warrior without peer. Those are fine words, your Grace, but words win no battles." "Swords win battles," Ser Jorah said bluntly, "and Prince Rhaegar knew how to use them." Dany turned back to the squire. I know little of Rhaegar, only details Viserys told, and he was a little boy when our brother died. What was he truly like? The old man considered a moment. Able, that above all. Determined. Deliberate, dutiful, single-minded. There is a tale told of him. But doubtless, Ser Jorah knows it as well. I would hear it from you. As you wish, said Whitebird. As a young boy, the Prince of Dragonstone was bookish to a fault. He was reading so early that men said Queen Rhaella must have swallowed some books and a candle whilst he was in her womb. Rhaegar took no interest in the play of other children. The maids were awed by his wits, but his father's knights would jest solely that Baelor the Blessed had been born again. Until one day Prince Rhaegar found something in his scrolls that changed him. No one knows what it might have been, only that the boy suddenly appeared early one morning in the yard as the knights were donning their steel. He walked up to Sir Willem Darry, the master-at-arms, and said, I will require sword and armor. It seems I must be a warrior. And he was, said Dany, delighted. He was indeed. Here is another scene that was omitted from the show, one that I include solely because I want to complain about one petty thing. The exiled knight ducked his head as he entered. Your Grace, I am sorry to disturb your sleep. I was not sleeping, sir. Come and watch. She took a chunk of salt pork out of the bowl in her lap and held it up for her dragons to see. All three of them eyed it hungrily. Rhaegal spread green wings and stirred the air, and Viserion's neck swayed back and forth like a long pale snake's as he followed the movement of her hand. Drogon, Dany said softly. Dracarys. And she tossed the pork in the air. Drogon moved quicker than a striking cobra. Flame roared from his mouth, orange and scarlet and black, searing the meat before it began to fall. As his sharp black teeth snapped shut around it, Rhaegal's head darted close, as if to steal the prize from his brother's jaws. But Drogon swallowed and screamed, and the smaller green dragon could only hiss in frustration. Stop that, Rhaegal, Dany said in annoyance, giving his head a swat. You had the last one. I will have no greedy dragons. She smiled at Ser Jorah. I don't need to char their meat over a brazier any longer. So I see. Dracarys. All three dragons turned their heads at the sound of that word, and Viserion let loose with a blast of pale gold flame that made Ser Jorah take a hasty step backward. Then he giggled. Be careful with that word, sir, or they will like to sing your bird off. It means dragonfire in High Valyrian. I wanted to choose a command that no one was like to utter by chance. Daenerys did teach the dragons this command in Season 2, but what wasn't mentioned is that she picked it specifically because it's not a word someone would say by accident. As far as we're concerned, no other dragon rider used that command. I mention it because Dany fans, myself included, weren't too pleased by House of the Dragon making Dracarys a command used by other dragon riders. It's important that it was Dany herself who came up with it. I doubt she had access to family histories that would mention it. From the histories we do have, it seems that rather than use commands, the dragon riders that came before Daenerys relied on whips and a telepathic bond. So this was simply the show riding off its predecessor in an attempt for a cheap connection. Since Jiqui and Irri are still alive, they are Dany's constant companions. Of course, Irri, leave us for a bit. She put a hand on Jiqui's bare shoulder and shook the other handmaid awake. You as well, sweetling. Ser Jorah needs to talk to me. Often the same complaints are made about Irri and Jiqui as of Jogo, Ago and Rakaro, that they have identical personalities and can only be distinguished by the fact that one has bigger boobs. But again, we already established in Season 2 that Amrita Acharya did not leave out of her own volition, and whoever played Jiqui had one scene before getting cut. The show was able to add new characters and expand on the personalities of minor book characters. Couldn't it do it for the girls? And especially because Dany has care and affection for both of them. She calls Jiqui sweetling, and later there is a scene of her kissing Irri's hand when Drogon bit her. The exclusion of the handmaids serves not only to remove Dany from the Dothraki, but also to make her isolated and lacking for female companions. The show decided to cut an outrageous thing Jorah does later. First, he once again reasserts his disdain of Arslan and Belvas. As mentioned previously, Jorah's mistrust of them isn't really there because of his goodwill, but because he doesn't want Dany to rely on anyone other than him. Jorah is not nearly as suspicious of everyone in the show as he is in the books. In fact, the show is pretty consistent in showing Jorah as genuinely devoted to Dany and genuinely in love. Due to aging Daenerys up and changing this entire dynamic from that of a grooming victim and a groomer, the general perception of Jorah also changed. As the show was airing, Jota gained the title of Sir Friendzone because Dany only ever considered him as her bestie, rejected his romantic advances, if she was even aware of them at all, while he endured it with grace. That too is a consistent pattern in how some exploitative relationships in the show are presented. Granted, I don't think George has a good track record with it, but the show was even more irresponsible with it. In the show, Sansa and Tyrion have a somewhat amicable relationship. Tyrion does not intend to bet her at any point, whereas in the books, he is pretty close to doing it. The show made Drogo far more affectionate and respectful towards Daenerys after his initial abuse of her. All abusive dynamics were switched so that the man gets absolved to some degree, but the case of Jota is by far the most outrageous anyway. It's also worth noting that in the books, Dany and her crew sailed to Pentos and a detour to Astapor was Jorah's idea, whereas in the show, they've been en route to Astapor since the beginning. If I am the first of your Queen's Guard, I pray you hear me out. I have a plan to put to you. What plan? Tell me. Illyrio Mopatis wants you back in Pentos, under his roof. Very well, go to him. But in your own time, and not alone. Let us see how loyal and obedient this new subject of yours truly are. Command Groleo to change course for Slaver's Bay. Dany was not certain she liked the sound of that at all. Everything she'd ever heard of the flesh marts in the great slave cities of Yunkai, Meereen and Astapor was dire and frightening. What is there for me in Slaver's Bay? An army, said Ser Jorah. If strong Belvas is so much to your liking, you can buy hundreds more like him out of the fighting pits of Meereen. But it is Astapor I would set my sails for. In Astapor you can buy Unsullied. The slaves in the spike bronze huts. Dany had seen Unsullied guards in the free cities, posted at the gates of Magisters, Archons, and Dynasts. Why should I want Unsullied? They don't even ride horses, and most of them are fat. The Unsullied you may have seen in Pentos and Myr were household guards. That's soft service, and eunuchs tend to plumpness in any case. Food is the only vice allowed them. To judge all Unsullied by a few old household slaves is like judging all squires by Arstan Whitebird, your grace. This is yet another thing the show downplayed. While in the show canon, Jorah indeed sold slaves and that was the reason for his exile, his indifference towards slavery was heavily downplayed. It was Jorah's idea to buy the Unsullied, and it becomes a source of a strife between him and Dany later on. And, most crucially, Jorah's sexual assault of Dany. At that point, she is 15 to his 40s. Jorah visits her when she's naked and... "Hand me my medallion belt," she commanded Jorah as she pulled the sunsilk up over her hips. "And my vest," she started to say, turning. Ser Jorah slid his arms around her. "Oh," was all Dany had time to say as he pulled her close and pressed his lips down on hers. He smelled of sweat and salt and leather, and the iron studs on his jerkin dug into her naked breasts as he crushed her heart against him. One hand held her by the shoulder, while the other slid down her spine to the small of her back, and her mouth opened for his tongue, though she never told it so. His beard was scratchy, she thought, but his mouth is sweet. The Dothraki wore no beards, only long moustaches, and only Khal Drogo had ever kissed her before. He should not be doing this. I am his queen, not his woman. It was a long kiss, though how long Dany could not have said. When it ended, Ser Jorah let go of her, and she took a quick step backward. You should not have. I should not have waited so long, he finished for her. I should have kissed you in Carf, in Vaes Toloro. I should have kissed you in the Red Waste, every night and every day. You were made to be kissed, often and well. His eyes were on her breasts. Then he covered them with her hands, before her nipples could betray her. That was not fitting. I am your queen. My queen, he said, and the bravest, sweetest, and most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Daenerys, your grace! Your grace, he conceded. The dragon has 3 heads, remember? You have wondered at that ever since you heard it from the warlocks in the House of Dust. Well, here's your meaning. Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar, ridden by Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya, the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. 3 dragons and 3 riders. Yes, said Dany, but my brothers are dead. Rhaenys and Visenya were Aegon's wives as well as his sisters. You have no brothers, but you can take husbands. And I tell you truly, Daenerys, there is no man in all the world who will ever be half as true to you as me. Daenerys is rightfully disturbed by it. Afterwards, she makes sure to never be alone with him because she does not want to be subjected to assault again. The last line is, once more, emblematic of his grooming. He says that he is the only one Dany should rely on, which is exactly what groomers tell their victims. All of this the show omitted in favor of making Jorah worthy of Danis' affection, and Dany herself as ungrateful for not choosing him. The way Jorah is adapted is emblematic of some incel wet dream. Here is a good, noble, handsome and charming man that the evil, selfish and standoffish woman rejects to instead play with sellswords of dubious loyalty. We have thus far only discussed Dany's first chapter, which describes solely her journey from Karth to Pentos, and the issue already visible in seasons 1 and 2 persists. Dany has 6 chapters in A Storm of Swords, but a lot of things happen in there, and these chapters tend to be quite long, often spanning several days. But once more, what actually happens in them gets condensed, cut and scattered across the episode. I always have this impression that her scenes hop out of nowhere and then end somewhat abruptly. I know that not every book conversation can make it onto the screen, because Game of Thrones had several storylines it had to follow, but that didn't seem to be a problem in other storylines. At its peak, Game of Thrones really was all about people talking in rooms, but that seems to be severely limited in Dany's storyline. We're on episode 1. My Google Doc already has 13 pages in length, and most of it is precisely the cut dialogue. This entire exposition-heavy chapter gets condensed into a singular scene where not much of substance is said or done. It is also in this episode that Daenerys sees the Unsullied for the first time.
The Unsullied have stood here for a day and a night with no food or water. They will stand until they drop. Such is their obedience.
They may suit my needs. Tell me of their training.
Japra vestorosia las kreni. I vetra storivije vachoma git miles kovejotre. Ebaskimi choskoki do Maznev von Mari.
Unibergistas Vestarosi lis cuni devoteta. Francisco Villa se adre hekido. Jotovi las pani.
They begin their training at 5. Every day they drill from dawn to dusk until they have mastered the short sword, the shield, and the 3 spears. Only 1 boy in 4 survives this rigorous training. Their discipline and loyalty are absolute. They fear nothing.
Even the bravest men fear death.
Jezanti ivetra shivali nevinki sisi zochilis vimurcho.
Ivetra ze vebituzi ze zorkos.
Swagizi, I
Dos
say.
vagizi. Scatala gen cupri. Pinda un kuma upzino. Ivetra skoji dovo hedi dosi vetida.
My master says the Unsullied are not men. Death means nothing to them.
Ivetra beza live on di odevo deta. Ezimacho.
He begs you attend this carefully, Your Grace. Tell the good master there is no need.
Zizezener kizi dozernes livas. Cara odreta vadovistos.
My master points out that men don't need nipples.
Avididan.
Busy, let's clinic. After Tago.
Nanarejo zezumbe. Se liva shidovo hedi.
To win his shield, an Unsullied must go to the slave marts with a silver mark, find a newborn, and kill it before its mother's eyes. This way, my master says, we make certain there is no weakness left in them.
You take a babe from its mother's arms, kill it as she watches and pay for her pain with a silver coin.
Las Angoda. Pindas luhazila megalebo vajib Mhysa zia ruho morchizi.
Kunimiti vezi bavori bezi. Ivetrashi kalebo seji.
My master would like you to know that the silver is paid to the baby's owner, not the mother.
How many do you have to sell?
Pindas coverdi dovo hedilis laraski. 8,000.
Ivetrashi li vestorosi kiza eva vaneko.
Master Krasnys asks that you please hurry. Many other buyers are interested.
And more omissions follow. Jorah takes Barristan's spot, since at that point he hasn't joined them yet. The casualties between Unsullied recruits is lowered from 33% to 25%. Crassus does not physically harass Missandei, as she speaks by poking her with the end of his lash. The diversity of ethnicities between the Unsullied is not sufficiently highlighted, which will contribute to problems further down the line. More than half had the copper skins and almond eyes of Dothraki and Lazarine, but she saw men of the Free Cities in the ranks as well, along with Bel Carthin, ebon-faced Summer Islanders, and others whose origins she could not guess. And some had skins of the same amber hue as Krasn's Monaclaws, and the bristly red-black hair that marked the ancient folk of Gis, who named themselves the Harpist Sons. They saw even their own kind. It should not have surprised her. The Dothraki did the same when Kalasar met Kalasar in the Sea of Grass. This shows that slavery in ASOS is class-based, not race-based, since there are people of various ethnicities among the soldiers, including the Giscari, the Carthin, and the Lyseni. It is also not shown that the Unsullied are very young, ranging from 14 to 20. All the extras seem to be well into adulthood. The cruelty of slavers is also underplayed. A bull is strong as well, but bulls die every day in the fighting pits. A girl of 9 killed one, not 3 days past in Jotril's pit. He stopped before a thick-set man who had the look of Lazar about him, and brought his whip up sharply, laying a line of blood across one copper cheek. The eunuch blinked, and stood there, bleeding. "Would you like another?" asked Krasnus. "If it please your worship." Dokor's pit has a fine folly scheduled for the evening. A bear and 3 small boys. One boy will be rolled in honey, one in blood, and one in rotting fish, and shimei-wagger on which the bear will eat first. The show omitted several aspects of Unsullied training as well. For example, that they are forced to drink a special wine to numb their pain receptors. The show also simplified the Unsullied naming custom. We do not even permit them names. "No names," Danny frowned and described. "Can that be what the good master said? They have no names." "It is so, your grace." Krasnus stopped in front of a Giscari, who might have been his taller, fitter brother, and flicked his lash at a small bronze disc of the sword belt at his feet. "There is his name. Ask the whore of Westeros whether she can read Giscari glyphs." When Dany admitted that she could not, the slaver turned to the Unsullied. "What is your name?" he demanded. "This one is Red Flea, your worship." The girl repeated their exchange in the common tongue. "And yesterday, what was it?" "Black Rat, your worship." "The day before?" "Brown Flea, your worship." "Before that?" "This one does not recall, your worship." "Blue Todd, perhaps. Or Blue Worm." "Tell her all their names are such," Krasnus commanded the girl. "It reminds them that by themselves they are vermin. The name discs are thrown in an empty cask at duty's end, and each don't plug up again at random. In the show, they are given derogatory names once as opposed to having new derogatory names every day. This becomes evident when we meet Grey Worm, and it significantly cheapens the exchange he and Dany have later. Last omission is this. Tell her that few ever fail this test. The dogs are harder for them, it must be said. We give each boy a puppy on the day that he is cut. At the end of the first year, he is required to strangle it. Any who cannot are killed, and fed to the surviving dogs. It makes for a good strong lesson, we find. Then another omission is a poignant exposition and a conversation between Dany and Arstan. Her litter came to a sudden halt at the cross street to allow a coffee of slaves to shuffle across her path, urged along by the crack of an overseer's slash. These were no Unsullied, Dany noted, but a more common sort of man, with pale brown skins and black hair. There were women among them, but no children. All were naked. Bricks and blood built Astapor, Whitebear murmured at her side. And bricks and blood her people. What is that? Dany asked him, curious. An old rhyme a maester taught me when I was a boy. I never knew how true it was. The bricks of Astapor are red with the blood of the slaves who make them. I can well believe that, said Dany. Then leave this place before your heart turns to brick as well. Sail this very night on the evening tide. Would that I could, thought Dany. When I leave Astapor, it must be with an army, Ser Jorah says. Ser Jorah was a slaver himself, your grace, the old man reminded her. There are sellsword in Pentos and Myr and Tyrosh you can hire. A man who kills for coin has no honor, but at least they are no slaves. Find your army there, I beg you. This exchange was cut because Barristan is not there yet, and Jorah's crime of selling people into slavery is mentioned once in Season 1 and never brought up again, as is his cavalier attitude to slavery in general. Arstan is far more outraged by the situation and makes sure to warn Daenerys that the Westerosi will look down at an army of slaves. The rest of the conversation is also omitted. My brother visited Pentos, Myr, Bravos, near all the 3 cities. The Magisters and Archons fed him wine and promises, but his soul was starved to death. A man cannot sup from the beggar's bowl all his life and stay a man. I had my taste in carve, that was enough. I will not come to Pentos, bowl in hand. Better to come a beggar than a slaver, Arslan said. There speaks one who has been neither. Danis' nostrils flared. Do you know what it is like to be sold, squire? I do. My brother sold me to Khal Drogo for the promise of a golden crown. Well, Drogo crowned him in gold, though not as he had wished, and my sun and stars made a queen of me, but if it had been a different man, it might have been much otherwise. Do you think I have forgotten how it felt to be afraid? Whitebird bowed his head. Your Grace, I did not mean to give offence. Only lies offend me, never honest counsel. Then he patted Arslan's spotted hand to reassure him. I have a dragon's temper, that's all. You must not let it frighten you. I shall try and remember. Whitebird smiled. This exchange shows that Daenerys is still aware that she herself was sold into slavery, even after she fell in love with her owner and abuser, and that it's what gives an extra layer to her sympathy to the slaves. She was both a beggar and a slave, but because showrunners D&D never saw her marriage as bridal slavery, and their gullible fans followed suit, this was too inconvenient to include. But by far the most outrageous change thus far is Showdanis' later reaction to the Unsullied training.
8,000 dead babies.
The Unsullied are a means to an end.
Once I own them, these men...
They're not men. Not anymore.
Once I own an army of slaves, what will I be?
Do you think these slaves will have better lives serving Krasnus and men like him or serving you?
As I might remind you, in the show, the ship is on the way to Astapor. In the books, 3 ships sail to Pentos, and it's Jorah who convinces Dany to deter to Astapor, to which she is apprehensive at first. Because of this, Dany and Jorah do not have an argument about it, and Dany's reaction to the horrors she had just heard about is far weaker. Then the assassination attempt originally in Carve happens and Barristan joins the team. Compare and contrast with how Dany feels about the situation in the books. How many men do they have for sale? None. Was it Mormont she was angry with? Or this city with its sullen heat, its stings and sweats and crumbling bricks? They sell eunuchs, not men. Eunuchs made of brick, like the rest of Astapor. Shall I buy 8,000 big eunuchs with dead eyes that never move, who kill suckling babes for the sake of a spiked hat and strangle their own dogs? They don't even have names. So, don't call them men, sir. Khaleesi, he said, taken aback by her fury. The Unsullied are chosen as boys and trained. I have heard all I care to of their training. Then he could feel tears welling in her eyes, sudden and unwanted. Her hand flashed up and cracked Ser Jorah across the face. It was either that or cry. Mormont touched the cheek she slapped. If I have displeased my queen, you have. You have displeased me greatly, sir. If you were my true knight, you would never have brought me to this vile sty. If you were my true knight, you would never have kissed me, or looked at my breasts the way you did, or... As your grace commands, I shall tell Capitan Groleo to make ready to sail on the evening tide, for some style less vile. No, said Dany. Groleo watched them from the forecastle, and his crew was watching too. Whitebird, her blood riders, Jiqui, everyone had stopped what they were doing at the sound of the slap. I want to sail now, not on the tide. I want to sail far and fast and never look back. But I can't, can I? There are 8,000 big eunuchs for sale, and I must find some way to buy them. And with that, she left him and went below. Dany's first appearance in this episode is her going through the Walk of Punishment, where rebellious slaves are punished for disobedience. Dany offers water to a dying slave, but he declines. The conversation during this walk is lifted from the last conversation Dany and Jorah have in Daenerys 2 about how the Unsullied, being eunuchs, at the very least will not rape and plunder. Then Barristan chimes in about Rhaegar and mentions some things about him that are otherwise conveyed to us in Daenerys 1 ASOS, but many details are omitted. There's also one addition. When Barristan says that Rhaegar was the last dragon, Daenerys claims that he wasn't, meaning herself. So we follow a pattern from Season 2. What is in Dany's dialogue from the book is cut and then substituted with these additions. Daenerys does not claim herself to be the last dragon. The only time she's called that is in her last dragon dream in A Game of Thrones, where she sees Rhaegar, but it's actually her. Book Daenerys is humble and would never claim herself to be the last dragon. Then Daenerys, Jorah and Barristan go to negotiate with the Masters of Astapor. It plays out more or less the same, but show Daenerys does not mention that she also intends to take the uncut boys. Another change is that in the show, Dany decides to take Missandei herself, saying it's Krazness' gift to her, whereas in the books, it's Krazness who gives her to Dany as a token. Their exchange later is also shortened and puzzling changes follow, as per usual.
Do you have a name? This one's name is Missandei, Your Grace. Do you have a family, a mother and a father you'd return to if you had the choice? No, Your Grace. No family living. You belong to me now. It is your duty to tell me the truth. Yes, Your Grace, lying is a great offence. Many of those on the Walk of Punishment were taken there for less. I offered water to one of the slaves dying on the Walk of Punishment. Do you know what he said to me? Let me die. There are no masters in the grave, Your Grace. Is it true what Master Krazness told me about the Unsullied, about their obedience? All questions have been taken from them. They obey, that is all. Once they are yours, they are yours. They will fall on their swords if you command it. And what about you? You know that I'm taking you to war. You may go hungry. You may fall sick. You may be killed. Valar Morghulis. Yes, all men must die. But we are not men.
Dany turned away from him to the slave girl standing meekly beside her litter. Do you have a name, or must you draw a new one every day from some barrel? That is only for Unsullied, the girl said. Then she realized the question had been asked in High Valyrian. Her eyes went wide. Oh. Your name is O? No, Your Grace, forgive this one her outburst. Your slave's name is Missandei, but Missandei is no longer a slave. I free you from this instant. Come ride with me in the litter. I wish to talk. Rakaro helped them in, and Dany drew the curtains shut against the dust and heat. If you stay with me, you will serve as one of my handmaids, she said as they set off. I shall keep you by my side to speak for me, as you spoke for Krazness. But you may leave my service whenever you choose. If you have father or mother, you would sooner return to. This one will stay, the girl said. This one, there is no place for me to go. I will serve you, gladly. I can give you freedom, but not safety, Dany warned. I have a war to cross and wars to fight. You may go hungry, you may grow sick, you may be killed. Valar Morghulis, said Missandei in High Valyrian. All men must die, Dany agreed, but not for a long while, we may pray. She leaned back on the pillows and took the girl's hand. Are these Unsullied truly fearless? Yes, Your Grace. You serve me now. Is it true they feel no pain? The wine of courage kills such feelings. By the time they slay their sucklings, they have been drinking it for years. And they are obedient. Obedience is all they know. If you told them not to breathe, they would find that easier than not to obey. Then I nodded. And when I am done with them? Your Grace. When I have won my war and claimed the throne that was my father's, my knights will sheathe their swords and return to their keeps, to their wives and children and mothers, to their lives. But these eunuchs have no lives. What am I to do with 8,000 eunuchs, when there are no more battles to be fought? The Unsullied make fine guards and excellent watchmen, Your Grace, said Missandei. And it is never hard to find a buyer for such fine, well-blooded troops. Men are not bought and sold in Westeros, they tell me. With all respect, Your Grace, Unsullied are not men. If I did resell them, how would I know they could not be used against me? Then he asked pointedly. Would they do that? Fight against me, even do me harm, if their masters commanded? They do not question, Your Grace. All the questions have been cut from them. They obey. She looked troubled. When you are done with them, Your Grace may command them to fall upon their swords. And even that they would do? Yes, Missandei's voice had grown soft. Your Grace. Dany squeezed her hand. You would sooner I did not ask it of them, though. Why is that? Why do you care? This one does not... Your Grace. Tell me. The girl lowered her eyes. 3 of them were my brothers once, Your Grace. Then I hope your brothers are as brave and clever as you. Let's go one by one. Immediately after the negotiations, Book Dany frees Missandei, while Show Dany never formally releases her from slavery. What is even more puzzling is that at some point Dany says, "You belong to me now." I don't know if this was malice on behalf of the showrunners or just the lack of care, but I have a lingering suspicion that the takes according to which Missandei is Dany's slave, with Irian Jikwi also being included, that I've seen, might come from this particular exchange. The second change is that Show Missandei does not have a living family. In the books, she had 3 brothers, all of whom were taken for unsullied training. 2 survived and one, Mosador, was killed in a dance with dragons by the Sons of the Harpy. This will become crucial later, as the character of Mosador was adapted very strangely in the show's 5th season. But all of that in time. Now we put a pin on it. Third change is the response Dany gives to Valar Morghulis. I seriously have no idea why it was changed to, "But we are not men." Is this the same instance as season 2 where Dany's dialogue and behavior gets altered in response to her being undermined by men? Probably, but this line is just silly. Do women not die in this universe or something? I believe it's worth discussing one more change regarding Missandei. In the books, she is only 10 years old, whereas the show casted Natalie Emmanuel, who was 24 at the time of filming, 2 years younger than Emilia Clarke. Arguably, casting children is a tricky business. If a 10-year-old actress had been cast, then by the time the series concluded, she would have been a teen, and at the time it was not yet known how long the series would be running. There are also labor laws for child actors, and in the UK, only those who are above 16 are allowed to work full-time, and even then, there are asterisks. In spite of Natalie Emmanuel's stellar job as Missandei and all these limitations, I believe that casting an adult as opposed to a child took away something from Dany's storyline. Daenerys and Missandei are not just besties and not just sisters. Their relationship is reminiscent of a mother and a daughter, in spite of there being only 5 years difference between them. I want to keep you safe. Missandei was only a child. With her, she felt as if she could be a child too. No one ever kept me safe when I was little. Well, Sir Willem did, but then he died. And Viserys? I want to protect you, but it is so hard. To be strong. I don't always know what I should do. I must know, though. I am all they have. I am the queen. The mother, whispered Missandei. Mother to dragons, Dany shivered. No, mother to us all. Missandei hugged her tighter. Honestly, this gives strength to my belief, shared by many other people, that A Song of Ice and Fire should have been an animated series, where there would be no such constraints. But that's perhaps a subject for another discussion entirely. The episode ends here, and the next time we will see Dany, it will already be the Unsullied buying time, but later that day in the books, several more things happen. It was a long, dark, windy night that followed. Dany fed her dragons as she always did, but found she had no appetite herself. She cried a while, alone in her cabin, then dried her tears long enough for yet another argument with Groleo. Magister Illyrio is not here, she finally had to tell him, and if he was, he could not sway me either. I need the Unsullied, more than I need these ships, and I will hear no more about it. The anger burned the grief and fear from her, for a few hours at least. Afterward, she had called her blood riders to her cabin, with Ser Jorah. They were the only ones she truly trusted. She meant to sleep afterward, to be well rested for the morrow, but an hour of restless tossing in the stuffy confines of the cabin soon convinced her that was hopeless. Outside her door, she found Aggo fitting a new string to his bow by the light of a swinging oil lamp. Recaro sat cross-legged on the deck beside him, sharpening his arak with a whetstone. Dany told them both to keep on with what they were doing. On deck for a taste of the cool night air. The crew left her alone as they went about their business, but Jorah soon joined her by the rail. He is never far, Dany thought. He knows my moods too well. Khaleesi, you ought to be asleep. Tomorrow will be hot and hard, I promise you. You need your strength. Do you remember Iroe? She asked him. The Nazarene girl. They were raping her, but I stopped them and took her under my protection. Only when my son and Stas was dead, Mago took her back, used her again, and killed her. Aggo said it was her fate. I remember, Ser Jorah said. I was alone for a long time, Jorah. All alone but for my brother. I was such a small, scared thing. Viserys should have protected me, but instead he hurt me and scared me worse. He shouldn't have done that. He wasn't just my brother, he was my king. Why do the gods make kings and queens, if not to protect the ones who can't protect themselves? Some kings made themselves. Robert did. He was no true king, Dany said scornfully. He did no justice. Justice. That's what kings are for. Ser Jorah had no answer. He only smiled and touched her hair so lightly. It was enough. That night she dreamed that she was Rhaegar, riding to the Trident, but she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurpers' rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in dragonfire, and they melted away like dew and turned the trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened. She woke suddenly in the darkness of her cabin, still flushed with triumph. Balerion seemed to wake with her, and she heard the faint creak of wood, water lapping against the hull, a footfall on the deck above her head, and something else. Someone was in the cabin with her. Iri, Jikwi, where are you? Her handmaids did not respond. It was too black to see, but she could hear them breathing. Jorah, is that you? They sleep, the woman said. They all sleep. The voice was very close. Even dragons must sleep. She is standing over me. Who's there? Dany peered into the darkness. She thought she could see a shadow, the faintest outline of a shape. What do you want of me? Remember, to go north, you must journey south. To reach west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. And to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Quaeve! Denis sprang from the bed and threw open the door. Pale yellow lantern light flooded the cabin, and Iri and Jikwi sat up sleepily. Khaleesi, murmured Jikwi, rubbing her eyes. Viserion woke and opened his jaws, and a puff of flame brightened even the darkest corners. There was no sign of a woman in a red lacquer mask. Khaleesi, are you unwell? Asked Jikwi. A dream. Dany shook her head. I dreamed a dream, no more. Go back to sleep. All of us, go back to sleep. Yet try as she might, sleep would not come again. I must admit that I have one major character flaw. I tend to give others the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it. I gave the showrunners the benefit of the doubt when they skipped Vaes Doloro in Season 2. After all, maybe they couldn't have found a suitable location. I gave them the benefit of the doubt with regards to the casting of Missandei. After all, there's UK child labour laws they have to follow. And earlier, I said that I understand that not every book scene can make it onto the screen because visual adaptations have different rules, and Game of Thrones had several storylines it had to follow. And I feel the need to retract the last one. Because you see, I did not have the best memory regarding the show. I haven't rewatched it in full in years, and for the purposes of the series, I was usually skipping the scenes of other characters to get to Daenerys, unless there was a scene that spiked my interest, or I wanted to compare and contrast something. And it just so happens that in Walk of Punishment, I stumbled onto two such scenes. Theon's torture at the hands of Ramsay, and the brothel scene, the one with Podrick. As a book reader, you should remember that Theon's torture and metamorphosis into Rick is conducted entirely off-screen, and we only see its aftermath. Of course, we could talk about the actor contracts. Maybe Alfie Allen had such a contract that he was required to appear in Season 3 and 4. But it's still absurd that the show had time to include those repetitive torture scenes for a character that is by no means a main player. And I'm saying this as someone who likes Theon a lot. The show also had time to create an original character of Ross, whose sole purpose was sexualizing the actress. And remember, by the time Game of Thrones was recorded, HBO had not yet been employing intimacy coordinators. And include the scene of Podrick in the brothel, who in the books is about 13 years old. So, do tell me, why was there time for all these inclusions and expansions in other storylines, but the main character, with the 4th highest POV count in the books, had her dialogue, scenes and interactions so significantly cut and altered? We do not get a single clue of Dany relaying her plan for the liberation of Unsullied to Jorah and the Blood Riders. Something she does, and something they agree to, because we see them prepare their weapons for the next day, and Jorah warns her that they have a long day ahead. The conversation when Dany confides to Jorah about what she sees as her failure of protecting Irohe is not included. Granted, the show cut Irohe, but the general sense of the conversation could have been kept intact, as is the crucial line establishing Dany's philosophy. The show is already fully committed to downplaying Dany's true motivations for the throne, duty to her house and her belief that queens and kings have a duty. Yeah, in the negotiation scene with Krasnys, we do see Dany look at the slave children with worry and pity. We do see her giving the water to the dying man. But the dialogue is absent. Daenerys speaks very little in her own story. And moreover, we have yet another continued pattern. The disappearance of dreams, magic and prophecies. Quaife is gone after season 2, and may I remind you, she and Dany never interacted in the show. We also have a removal of the dream of Dany fighting the others. The placement of this dream is not a coincidence, because the slavers and the others are thematically linked together. And it is a dragon dream. Yet another the show omitted, skipping this aspect of her character altogether. I'm honestly pretty sure that Quaife appeared to Dany using a glass candle, something absent from the show as well. So, let's ask again. Why do we have time for Theon torture porn number 2137 and all those brothel scenes, but not for crucial elements of the characterization of the female lead? I mean, I know why, but how come I see so few people take note of it? Staunch book readers included. The next day, Dany indeed goes to buy the Unsullied, and her appearance in And Now His Watch is Ended is perhaps one of the most iconic scenes in the show. And as great as it is, there are, again, changes and omissions. First, Dany's entire entourage follows her to Astapor, and Dany places everyone quite skillfully, showing her strategic ability. Aggo went before her with his great Dothraki bow. Strong Belvas walked to the right of her mare, the girl Missandei to her left. Ser Jorah Mormont was behind in mail and surcoat, glowering at anyone who came too near. Rakaro and Jogo protected the litter. Dany had commanded that the top be removed, so her 3 dragons might be chained to the platform. Irri and Jikwi rode with them, to try and keep them calm. Yet Viserion's tail lashed back and forth, and smoke rose angry from his nostrils. Rhaegal could sense something wrong as well. Thrice he tried to take wing, only to be pulled down by the heavy chain in Jikwi's hand. Drogon curled into a ball, wings and tail tucked tight. Only his eyes remained, to tell that he was not asleep. The rest of her people followed. Groleo and the other captains and their crews, and the 83 Dothraki who remained to her of the 100,000 who had once ridden in Drogo's Kalasar. She put the oldest and weakest on the inside of the column, with the nursing women and those with child, and the little girls, and the boys too young to braid their hair. The rest, her warriors, such as they were, rode outside and moved their dismal herd along. The 100-odd gaunt horses that had survived both the Red Waste and the Black Salt Sea. Another quality that is downplayed in show Dany is how perceptive she is. Krasnys Monaclos and his fellows were all there to greet her. Other well-born Astapori stood in knots behind them, sipping wine from silver flutes, as slaves circulated among them with trays of olives and cherries and figs. The elder Grasdan sat in a sedan chair, supported by 4 huge copper-skinned slaves. Half a dozen mounted lancers rode along the edges of the plaza, keeping back the crowds who had come to watch. The sun flashed blinding bright off the polished copper discs sewn to their cloaks, but she could not help but notice how nervous their horses seemed. They feared the dragons. And well they might. She takes notice of everyone present at the perches and the military strength present to guard the gathering. Interestingly, she does not seem to notice any children, but that is probably because she is the most unreliable narrator in the history of literature, who constantly warps her reality to suit her and hallucinates 90% of the things that happen around her. Now, let's compare these 2 iconic scenes.
Dohaeris! Naidon mevatas! Eletis!
Tra! Ivetrages per divito magis!
Zaldrizes buzdaris kosdaur!
Itragi valere!
Nige Daenerys gel masmo hen Targaryen entrot, hen Valeria wepoana garexan. Valeria munioengos nuihis isa. Dohaeris! Axia osentas, menti osentas! Kiloni pilos luevale tolvi osenetas, inini otricatas, urnelue dolide prijatas!
Aske! Sesena!
Dracarys.
Dany mounted her silver. She could feel her heart thumping in her chest. She felt desperately afraid. Was this what my brother would have done? She wondered if Prince Rhaegar had been this anxious when he saw the usurper's host formed up across the Trident, with all their banners floating on the wind. She stood in her stirrups and raised the harpist's fingers above her head for all the Unsullied to see. "It is done!" she cried at the top of her lungs. "You are mine!" She gave the mare her heels and galloped along the first rank, holding the fingers high. "You are the dragons now! You're bought and paid for! It is done! It is done!" She glimpsed old Grasdan turn his grey head sharply. He hears me speak Valyrian. The other slavers were not listening. They crowded around Krasnus and the dragon, shouting advice. Though the Astapori young and tagged, Drogon would not budge off the litter. Smoke rose grey from his open jaws, and his long neck curled and straightened as he snapped at the slaver's face. "It is time to cross the Trident," Dany thought, as she wheeled and rolled her silver back. Her blood riders moved in close around her. "You are in difficulty," she observed. "He will not come," Krasnus said. "There is a reason. A dragon is no slave." And Dany swept the lash down as hard as she could across the slaver's face. Krasnus screamed and staggered back, the blood running red down his cheeks into his perfumed beard. The harpy's fingers had torn his features half to pieces, with one slash, but she did not pause to contemplate the ruin. "Dragon," she sang out loudly, sweetly, all her fear forgotten. "Dracarys." The dragon spread his wings and roared. A lance of swirling dark flame took Krasnus full in the face. His eyes melted and ran down his cheeks, and the awe in his hair and burst so fiercely into fire that for an instant the slaver wore a burning crown, twice as tall as his head. The sudden stench of charred meat overwhelmed even his perfume, and his wails seemed to drown all other sound. Then the plaza of punishment blew apart into blood and chaos. The good masters were shrieking, stumbling, shoving one another aside and tripping over the fringes of their tokars in their haste. Drogon flew almost lazily at Krasnus, black wings beating. As he gave the slaver another taste of fire, Irian Jikwi unchained Viserion and Rhaegal, and suddenly there were 3 dragons in the air. When Dany turned to look, a third of Astaport's proud demon-homed warriors were fighting to stay atop their terrified mounts, and another third were fleeing in a bright blaze of shiny copper. One man kept his saddle long enough to draw a sword, but Drogo's whip curled about his neck and cut off his shout. Another lost a hand to Rakaros Arak and rode off reeling and spurting blood. Aggo sat calmly, notching arrows to his bowstring and sending them at tokars. Silver, gold, or plain, he cared nothing for the fringe. Strong Belvas had his Arak out as well, and he spun it as he charged. "Spears!" Then he heard one Astapori shout. It was Grazdan, old Grazdan in his tokar, heavy with pearls. "Unsullied! Defend us! Stop them! Defend your masters! Spears! Swords!" When Akaro put an arrow through his mouth, the slaves holding his sedan chair broke and ran, dumping him unceremoniously on the ground. The old man crawled to the first rank of eunuchs, his blood pooling on the bricks. The Unsullied did not as much as look down to watch him die. Rank on rank on rank they stood, and did not move. "The gods have heard my prayer." "Unsullied!" Dany galloped before them, her silver gold braid flying behind her, her bell chiming with every stride. "Slay the good masters! Slay the soldiers! Slay every man who wears a tokar or holds a whip, but harm no child under 12, and strike the chains of every slave you see!" She raised the harpy's fingers in the air, and then she flung the scourge aside. "Freedom!" she sang out. "Dracarys! Dracarys! Dracarys!" they shouted back, the sweetest word she'd ever heard. "Dracarys! Dracarys!" And all around them slavers ran and sobbed and begged and died, and the dusty air was filled with spears and fire. The Dothraki are present and take part in the fight. Note that Aggo shoots his arrows very calmly and knows whom to target. This gives proof to my belief that the Blood Riders and Jorah knew of this plan and agreed to help her execute it. Since there's no Blood Riders in the show, I guess that doesn't matter. The change I personally wish was included was the Unsullied shouting Dracarys back. Often I hear about how the Unsullied are just mindless killing machines, who are still slaves to Dany because they were brainwashed too hard to know anything else. This one thing shows that not only is it not true, but that the Unsullied have never been truly brainwashed at all. This happens before Dany undertakes a campaign to rehumanize them. They know that the word Dracarys freed them. They know that they are free. They repeat this word without getting an order. This is something they do on their own volition, and with clear joy and relief. In this episode, Barristan and Jorah are shown to have an amicable relationship and even joke around. Now, this is in stark contrast to Book Jorah, who hates Barristan, who is still disguised as Arstan. And now we have an answer to a mystery as to why Barristan never told Daenerys that Jorah was a spy. Apparently, he didn't know that in the show. When Jorah wants to sneakily find out whether he was sitting on the small council and knew of this, Barristan informs him that he wasn't sitting on the small council because Robert didn't want him to because he killed his friends during the rebellion and didn't want a man who served the Mad King to advise him. Now, that's absurd. A Lord Commander always sits on the small council, whether the king likes him or not. And Barristan did so in the books, as Robert pardoned him and even sent his own maester to treat him after he was wounded in battle. All of this could have been avoided if they kept Barristan in disguise, but they wrote themselves into a corner and had to come up with this silly explanation. They did this for no reason other than whitewashing Jorah and making him Barristan's bestie, when in the books he hates him due to jealousy, because he wants to be the only man in Daenerys' life. A groomer's behavior. Grey Worm appears for the first time and Missandei explains why he bears such a derogatory name. Dany does order them to choose new names for themselves and Grey Worm explains why he wants to remain Grey Worm. Because he believes that name to be lucky, since he had it when Dany set him free. The scene is incredibly moving, thanks to Jacob's and Emilia's acting, but the simplifying of the Unsullied naming conventions robs it of extra depth. In the books, the Unsullied have new derogatory names every day, chosen at random. This is why Grey Worm is a lucky name to him. He picked it up specifically on the day Daenerys liberated him. A name is the first primary marker of one's identity, the first thing your parents give to you, something that stays with you throughout your entire life. Most people change their names only when their identity gets significantly altered in some way. Robbing someone of the ability to possess a name is the first step to violent dehumanization. To the people who created the Unsullied, they were not humans, they were vermin, they were just numbers. Grey Worm subverted this custom by reclaiming this name from his oppressors. That's why it's so important that it's a new name every day, not just one derogatory name given once. There really was no reason to change that. Either show this custom in the scene of Krasnus presenting Dany with Unsullied, or add one extra line of dialogue to Missandei. Your Grace, the Unsullied choose new names at random every day. Would it rob us of precious screen time to add one detail to the dialogue? Are the audiences too dumb to understand the concept of Unsullied getting new names every day? That might be it, since they changed Asha's name to Yara, so that she is not mistaken with Osha. But I honestly think they did so just to reduce how special Grey Worm's decision is in this particular context. What I noticed is that it does not seem like Dany is followed by the hordes of the freedmen on her way to Yunkai. That's one of the big reasons why she decided to take Meereen later on, and her being unwilling to abandon them shows what her goals are in the campaign. A second encampment lay close beyond her own, 5 times the size. The second camp had no ditches, no tents, no sentries, no horse lines. Those who had horses or mules slept beside them, for fear they may be stolen. Goats, sheep, and half-starved dogs wandered freely amongst hordes of women, children, and old men. Then they had left Astapor in the hands of a council of former slaves, led by a healer, a scholar, and a priest. Wise men all, she thought, and just. Yet even so, tens of thousands preferred to follow her to Yunkai, rather than remain behind in Astapor. I gave them the city, and most of them were too frightened to take it. The ragtag host of freedmen dwarfed her own, but they were more burden than benefit. Perhaps 1 in 100 had a donkey, a camel, or an ox. Most carried weapons, looted from some slaver's armory, but only 1 in 10 was strong enough to fight, and none was trained. They ate the land bare as they passed, like locusts in sandals. Yet Dany could not bring herself to abandon them, as Ser Jorah and her blood riders urged. I told them they were free. I cannot tell them now they are not free to join me. She gazed at the smoke rising from their cook fires, and swallowed the sight. She might have the best foot soldiers in the world, but she also had the worst. I think it's worth noting that the episode The Bear and the Maiden Fair was written by George himself, so it will be interesting to see how he approached writing Daenerys into her defining campaign. In the books, Daenerys negotiates with the Stormcrows first, while in the show, she negotiates with the Yunkish envoy first.
Ancient and glorious is Yunkai. Our empire was old before dragons stirred in old Valyria. Many an army has broken against our walls. You shall find no easy conquest here, Khaleesi.
Good. My Unsullied need practice. I was told to blood them early.
Blood is your desire. Blood shall flow. But why? 'Tis true, you have committed savageries in Astapor. But the Yunkai are a forgiving and generous people. The wise masters of Yunkai have sent a gift for the Silver Queen. There is far more than this awaiting you on the deck of your ship.
My ship?
Yes, Khaleesi. As I said, we are a generous people. You shall have as many ships as you require.
And what do you ask in return?
All we ask is that you make use of these ships. Sail them back to Westeros where you belong and leave us to conduct our affairs in peace.
I have a gift for you as well. Your life.
My life.
And the lives of your wise masters, but I also want something in return. You will release every slave in Yunkai. Every man, woman, and child shall be given as much food, clothing, and property as they can carry as payment for their years of servitude. Reject this gift, and I shall show you no mercy.
You are mad. We are not Astapor or Karth. We are Yunkai. And we have powerful friends who would take great pleasure in destroying you. Those who survive, we shall enslave once more. Perhaps we'll make a slave of you as well. You swore me safe conduct.
I did, but my dragons made no promises, and you threatened their mother.
Take the gold.
My gold. You gave it to me, remember? And I shall put it to good use. You'd be wise to do the same with my gift to you. Now get out.
The Yunkish are proud people. They will not bend.
What happens to things that don't bend? He said he had powerful friends. Who was he talking about?
I don't know.
Find out.
The scene plays out more or less the same in the books, with several minor changes that I don't think impact the storyline all that much. I wanted to show this scene because what I find striking about it is that this is a very rare scene in which we see Daenerys having a near exact same personality as her book self. She is not cold and stoic in this scene, but more so playful, nor does she make any overt threats. Compare and contrast with this scene at the Gates of Karth in Season 2. This is how we know that George wrote this scene. And credit where credit is due. I love that Daenerys attached a slave collar to her dress to show her solidarity with the slaves. That was one of the very few good decisions for her costume-wise. Shame that we couldn't see a collar elsewhere. A golden one, perhaps. What is a bit sadder is that Razdal's line, "You are mad," gets vindicated in retrospect. Yes, in the showverse, the slaver is right. She is mad. And what she's doing right now is proof of it. Canonically. The discussion between Mero, the Titan's bastard, and Daenerys also happens more or less the same, only book Dario is one of the captains of the Stormcrows, whereas in the show he is one of the second sons, though he is only a lieutenant. Dany retains her book self's playfulness in this scene as well, a rare sight, so we will count it as a big win. Like in the books, Dario does betray the other captains, but unlike the books, he does not kill Mero, since he is a second son and not a Stormcrow, and Mero will have one important role later in the book. What isn't another big win is Dany's later scene with Missandei, which doesn't happen in the book.
19? Yes, Your Grace. How can anyone speak 19 languages?
It only took Your Grace a year to learn Dothraki reasonably well.
Yes, well, it was either learn Dothraki or grunt at my husband and hope. What do you mean reasonably well?
Dothraki is difficult for the mouth to master. So guttural and harsh.
Je drogo as Dothraki mi thrashoma atjan at jahaka.
Ath Jahakar.
At jahaka.
Ath Jahakar.
At jahakar. Well, I suppose I'm a bit out of practice.
So, Daenerys takes minor offense in Missandei, saying that her Dothraki is only reasonably well, and tries to prove that she knows it more than reasonably well, only to be corrected. The book does not make mention of Dany's Dothraki being subpar, nor is Daenerys bragging about her linguistic abilities, which are considerable, given that she speaks the Common Tongue, Bastard Tyroshi Valyrian, High Valyrian, Giscari Valyrian, and Dothraki, the last two of which she picks up very quickly. Book Daenerys wouldn't say that, especially to a translator who knows 19 languages, because she is very humble. And Emilia Clarke is once more forced to do a nude scene with no intimacy coordinator. There is another scene in this chapter that never made it to screen. Daenerys finally calling out Jorah for his disgusting behavior. "Daenerys, I am thrice your age," Ser Jorah said. "I have seen how false men are. Very few are worthy of trust, and Daario Naharis is not one of them. Even his beard wears false colors." That angered her. Whilst you have an honest bird. Is that what you are telling me? You are the only man I should ever trust. He stiffened. I did not say that. You say it every day. Pietpri's a liar, Xaros a schemer, Belvas a braggart, Arslan an assassin. Do you think I'm some virgin girl, that I cannot hear the words behind the words? Your Grace, she bowled over him. You have been a better friend to me than any I have known, a better brother than Viserys ever was. You are the first of my Queen's Guard, the commander of my army, my most valued counselor, my good right hand. I honor and respect and cherish you. But I do not desire you, Jorah Mormont, and I am wary of your trying to push every other man in the world away from me, so I must rely on you and you alone. It will not serve, and it will not make me love you any better. Mormont had flushed red when she first began, but by the time Danny was done, his face was pale again. He stood still as stone. If my queen commands, he said, curt and cold. Danny was warm enough for both of them. She does, she said. She commands. Now go see to your unsullied, sir. You have a battle to fight and win. Since Jorah is an amazing guy whose counsel never has ulterior motives and who never sexually assaulted her, the conversation has no reason to be in the show's version of events. But I am still deeply puzzled by how the show treats Jorah and why this change even happened. I still have no good answers to that. The show did not have problems adding scenes of sexual violence that were not in the books, but they actually removed Jorah's grooming and his non-consensual kiss to make him a good guy to this ungrateful bitch Daenerys. Was it to demonize her? I really don't know at this point. In the reigns of Castamere, Dany, Jorah, Barristan, Grey Worm and the newly joined member of her entourage Daario discussed plans for the attack on Yunkai.
Where?
There. It's a back gate. My men use it when they visit Yunkai's bed slaves.
Your men, but not you.
I have no interest in slaves. A man cannot make love to property. This is where we enter the city. Very few guards, they know me. They let me inside.
You're not gonna sneak an army through a back gate.
I kill the guards. I take your 2 best men and lead them through the back streets, which I know well, and open the front gates. Then comes the army. Once the walls are breached, the city will fall in hours.
Or perhaps you lead Grey Worm and me to the slaughter, cutting the head off our army. The masters of Yunkai will pay you your fee and you won't have to split it 3 ways because you've already slaughtered your partners.
You have a very suspicious mind. In my experience, only dishonest people think this way.
You command the Unsullied. What do you think?
Logenton mire no mas Mhysa. Iderena kopsa verdagon Isa.
Odaban, squadras, trezikido.
You leave tonight?
Very good. We'll prepare.
The most egregious thing about it is that in the books, Daenerys herself devises the plan to attack Yunkai, showing her great strategic ability, especially for someone who was never formally educated. An hour past midnight should be time enough. Yes, Khaleesi, said Rakaro. Time for what? To mount our attack. Sir Jorah Mormont scowled. You told the sellswords that I wanted their answers on the morrow. I made no promises about tonight. The Stormcrows will be arguing about my offer. The Second Sons will be drunk on the wine I gave Mero. And the Yunkai believe they have 3 days. We will take them under cover of this darkness. They will have scouts watching for us. And in the dark, they will see hundreds of campfires burning, said Dany. If they see anything at all. Khaleesi, said Drogo. I will deal with these scouts. They are no riders, only slavers on horses. Just so, she agreed. I think we should attack from 3 sides. Grey Worm, your Unsullied shall strike at them from right and left, while my cause lead my horse in wedge for a thrust through their center. Slave soldiers will never stand before mounted Dothraki. She smiled. To be sure, I am only a young girl and know little of war. What do you think, my lords? I think you are Rhaegar Targaryen's sister, Ser Jorah said with a rueful half-smile. Aye, said Arslan Whitebird, and a queen as well. The show makes the entire strategy Daario's idea, and Dany's only purpose in this scene is to nod along, translate for Grey Worm, and get subtly wooed by Daario. Jorah's suspicions are once more shown as somewhat reasonable, since Dany has too many hots for Daario to be able to judge his character for herself, and she needs reasonable men to make their judgment for her. And apparently, showrunners cannot imagine a woman having good strategic abilities, it has to be men that come up with the attack. This also continues the pattern of downplaying her importance in her own story. Notice how in this scene she only has 4 short lines. Where, you are a leader now, do you trust him, and you live tonight. while Jorah and Daario engage in a long conversation as she watches in silence. Later this episode, Daario, Jorah and Grey Worm execute the plan as Daenerys waits anxiously in her tent with Barristan and Missandei. In the books, Dany has one extra scene with her dragons, following her argument with Jorah. When he was gone, Dany threw herself down on her pillows beside her dragons. She had not meant to be so sharp with Ser Jorah, but his endless suspicion had finally woken her dragon. He will forgive me, she told herself. I am his liege. Dany found herself wondering whether he was right about Daario. She felt very lonely all of a sudden. Mirri Maz Duur had promised that she would never bear a living child. House Targaryen will end with me. That made her sad. You must be my children, she told the dragons. My 3 fierce children. Arslan says dragons live longer than men, so you will go on after I am dead. Drogon looped his neck around to nip at her hand. His teeth were very sharp, but he never broke her skin when they played like this. Dany laughed and rolled him back and forth until he rode, his tail lashing like a whip. It would be great if Dany's sadness at being the last Targaryen and her maternal feelings towards the dragons were highlighted in some way. She can tell that to Missandei or even Barristan, though remember, there is a rather big continuity error in the show, where Mirri Maz Duur never really tells Dany that she is infertile. Speaking of Barristan, in the book, Dany and Arslan have another conversation that got cut. When the old man came, she was curled up inside her hrakarpel, whose musty smell still reminded her of Drago. I cannot sleep when men are dying for me, White Bird, she said. Tell me more of my brother Rhaegar, if you would. I like the tale you told me on the ship, of how he decided that he must be a warrior. Your Grace is kind to say so. Viserys said that our brother won many tourneys. Austar bowed his white head respectfully. It is not meet for me to deny his Grace's words. But, said Dany sharply, tell me, I commanded. Prince Rhaegar's prowess was unquestioned, but he seldom entered the lists. He never loved the Songs of Swords the way that Robert did, or Jaime Lannister. It was something he had to do, a task that word had set him. He did it well, for he did everything well. That was his nature. But he took no joy in it. Men said that he loved his harp much better than his lance. He won some tourneys, surely, said Dany, disappointed. When he was young, his Grace rode brilliantly in a tourney at Storm's End, defeating Lord Steffon Baratheon, Lord Jason Mallister, the Red Viper of Dorne, and a mystery knight who proved to be the infamous Simon Toyne, chief of the Kingswood Outlaws. He broke 12 lances against Sir Arthur Dayne that day. Was he the champion then? No, Your Grace. That honor went to another knight of the Kingsguard, who unhorsed Prince Rhaegar in the final tilt. Dany did not want to hear about Rhaegar being unhorsed. But what tourneys did my brother win? Your Grace, the old maid hesitated. He won the greatest tourney of them all. Which was that? Dany demanded. The tourney Lond Went staged at Harrenhal beside the God's Eye, in the year of the false spring. A notable event. Besides the jousting, there was a melee in the old style, fought between 7 teams of knights, as well as archery and axe throwing, a horse race, a tournament of singers, a mummers' show, and many feasts and frolics. Lord Went was as open-handed as he was rich. The lavish purses, he proclaimed, drew hundreds of challengers. Even your royal father came to Harrenhal, when he had not left the Red Keep for long years. The greatest lords and mightiest champions of the 7 kingdoms rode in the tourney, and the Prince of Dragonstone bested them all. But that was the tourney when he crowned Lyanna Stark as Queen of Love and Beauty, said Dany. Princess Elia was there, his wife, and yet my brother gave the crown to the Stark girl, and later stole her away from her betrothed. How could he do that? Did the Dornish woman treat him so ill? It is not for such as me to say what might have been in your brother's heart, Your Grace. The Princess Elia was a good and gracious lady, though her health was ever delicate. Dany pulled the lion pelt tighter about her shoulders. Viserys said once that it was my fault, for being born too late. She had denied it hotly, she remembered, going so far as to tell Viserys that it was his fault for not being born a girl. He bet her cruelly for that insolence. If I had been born more timely, he said, Rhaegar would have married me instead of Elia, and it would all have come out different. If Rhaegar had been happy in his wife, he would not have needed the Stark girl. Perhaps so, Your Grace. Whitebird paused a moment. But I am not certain it was in Rhaegar to be happy. You make him sound so sore, Dany protested. Not sore, no, what? There was a melancholy to Prince Rhaegar, a sense... The old man hesitated again. Say it, she urged. A sense of doom. He was born in grief, my queen, and that shadow hung over him all his days. Viserys had spoken of Rhaegar's birth only once. Perhaps the tale saddened him too much. It was the shadow of Summerhall that haunted him, was it not? Yes, and yet Summerhall was the place the prince loved best. He would go there from time to time, with only his harp for company. Even the knights of the King's Guard did not attend him there. He liked to sleep in a ruined hall, beneath the moon and stars, and whenever he came back, he would bring a new song. When you heard him play his high harp with the silver strings, and sing of twilights and tears and the death of kings, you could not but feel that he was singing of himself and those he loved. What of the usurper? Did he play sad songs as well? Arstan chuckled. Robert liked songs that made him laugh. The buffier the better. He only sang when he was drunk, and then it was like to be a cask of ale, or 54 tons, or the bear and the maiden fair. Robert was much another conversation about Rhaegar that gets cut. I would have preferred to see it as opposed to the battle, which in the book happens off screen. Like I keep stressing, Rhaegar is an important figure in the books, and he is very important to Dany specifically. He is the actual character that haunts the narrative, and he is highlighted or mentioned so rarely that I heard that in Season 6, when Jon Snow's parentage was revealed, some people were confused and thought that Ned is the father. Jorah arrives all bloodied and announces victory. First thing Book Daenerys asks about are their own losses, what happened to Gresdan and Mero, and to spare the slaves who dropped their weapons. First thing Show Daenerys asks is whether Daario survived the battle, to Jorah's disappointment, showing her as cruel and heartless to a poor noble knight who genuinely loves her, while letting her newfound crush cloud her judgment. You know, often I hear about how stupid Dany is about Daario, how she trusts him unconditionally and all that. I have a lingering suspicion that this scene could have contributed to this perception. We end the season with the controversial Mhysa scene that caused a lot of stir when this episode aired, giving Daenerys white savior allegations. And here I think George explains this situation best. Most of these people have obviously not read the books. If they had, they would know there is no racial component to slavery as practiced on ASOS. It is based on slavery as it existed in the ancient world. The Romans and Greeks were just as willing to enslave other Greeks and Romans as they were Celts, Goths, Germans and Africans. It's on the page. However, when you are filming scenes in Morocco and you put out a call for extras, it's Moroccans who show up. Most of them are darker skinned than our European actors, though there is actually a lot of different races and ethnic groups represented in the country, including Arabs, Berbers, Africans, French, etc. It is not so different from shooting a scene in Belfast and putting out a call for extras, whereupon a lot of Irish show up. We fly our actors from country to country and continent to continent at considerable expense, but that's not a practical consideration when dealing with extras. So in any big crowd scene, the prevailing skin color is always going to echo that of whatever the location is that you're shooting in. But just for the record, yes, Dany is white, just as she has been from the beginning, and she may or may not be a savior. The last scene in Mhysa is not the end of her journey by any means, but she frees slaves of all colors, races, creeds, and nationalities.
And there have also been some critique of some of the racial tropes, for instance, using the trope of the kind of white savior of dark people, like in the case of Daenerys Targaryen. So I'm curious, do you think that these critiques are justified? How do you respond to those critiques?
First of all, you have to separate the books from the television show. They're two different things. And sometimes it's very clear, as in the case of this white savior business with the scene with Daenerys, where she is hailed by the slaves that she's just freed in the city of Yunkai. That scene is drawn largely from the books, but in the books, I think I make it very clear that the slavery of Slaver's Bay of Yunkai and Astapor and Marine is not racially based. Mm-hmm. It's not American slavery, which was strictly race-based. It's modeled much more on the slavery of the ancient Near East of the Romans and the Greeks, where slaves could be of any race. It could just be the guys who lost the last war. The Greeks enslaved each other. If Thebes defeated Athens in a war, a bunch of Athenians would suddenly be slaves in Thebes, and vice versa. The Romans conquered people of various colors in Africa and very different colors in Germany and Gaul, and made slaves of them all. And that's certainly what I depict in the books. And I think that's what is meant to be depicted in the TV show too, but there are practicalities with running a TV show. Those scenes were filmed in Morocco. And the people that you see are extras who are paid, $30 a day or something like that to perform, just to be in the background. When you film that, the practicalities are you put out a call for extras, and people show up, and you sign up as many as you need. When you do that in Morocco, Moroccans show up. I mean, obviously, there's an implication there that people took of it, perhaps people who had not read the books, that all of the people that she freed were brown or black, and that's certainly was not intended to be the case. But on the other hand, flying in people from Ireland in order to people this scene in Morocco just to stand in the crowd would have been very, very cost prohibitive. These are the kind of practicalities of television production that some critics never take into advantage.
That does not mean there was not ignorance involved in this scene, because it's very different in the books. Mhysa, a brown-skinned man, shouted out at her. He had a child on his shoulder, a little girl, and she screamed the same word in her thin voice. Mhysa, Mhysa. Then he looked at Missandei. What are they shouting? It is Giscari, the old pure tongue. It means mother. Then he felt a lightness in her chest. I will never bear a living child, she remembered. Her hand trembled as she raised it. Perhaps she smiled. She must have, because the man grinned and shouted again, and others took up the cry. Mhysa, they called. Mhysa, Mhysa. They were all smiling at her, reaching for her, kneeling before her. Maela, some called her, while others cried Aelala, or Kapi, or Tato, but whatever the tongue, it all meant the same thing. Mother, mother, they are calling me mother. The chant grew, spread, swelled. It swelled so loud that it frightened her horse, and the mare backed and shook her head, and lashed her silver-grey tail. It swelled until it seemed to shake the yellow walls of Yunkai. More slaves were streaming from the gates every moment, and as they came, they took up the call. They were running toward her now, pushing, stumbling, wanting to touch her hand, to stroke her horse's mane, to kiss her feet. Her poor blood riders could not keep them all away, and even strong Belvas grunted and growled in dismay. Ser Jorah urged her to go, but then remembered a dream she had dreamed in the House of the Undying. They will not hurt me, she told him. They are my children, Jorah. She laughed, put her heels into her horse, and rode to them, the bells in her hair singing sweet victory. She trotted, then cantered, then broke into a gallop, her braids streaming behind. The freed slaves parted before her. Mother, they called from 100 throats, 1,000, 10,000. Mother, they sang, their fingers brushing her legs as she flew by. Mother, mother, mother. This scene could have been made less offensive, even with the Moroccan extras, if only the sea of brown people lifting a white woman up was written differently. If she just walked among them, it would perhaps not be as big of a problem, but someone in the production decided it would be a good idea to have her be raised like this. It was certainly not there to sneakily show that Daenerys is an evil white savior like it is claimed by some less sharp tools in the shed. The people who wrote this episode, Benioff and Weiss, were two white men who wanted to make a show where the Confederacy won. Surely, such characters would not be shrewd enough to include such a nuanced criticism in their show. 11 years later, this argument persists, even, and maybe especially, in the context of the books, where it's made abundantly clear that ASOS slavery is class-based. We see Lizeni and Karthin unsullied after all, and we know that the Giscari also enslave members of their own ethnicity. Any and all the people who make arguments about how Book Daenerys is a white savior either didn't read the books or allowed the show to completely overtake their perception of the story. both puzzling stances to take, to say the least. With this scene, we conclude Season 3. Overall, if I were to give my assessment of Season 3 Daenerys as a whole, I would say that it was a rather mixed bag. The first 3 episodes of the season were rather weak, with the egregious cutting of her book scenes, the continued whitewashing of Jorah, and the already well-established pattern of changing Dany's characterization while simplifying her storyline, as seen with Arslan Barristan and the unsullied naming custom. The show somewhat redeems itself in episode 4 with the iconic Dracarys scene, and becomes pretty good with the scenes of Dany's negotiation with Razdal and the Second Sons. Then it sinks back again with more omissions from the books, Dany's military prodigy being undermined to prop Daario up, and the appalling changes to the Mhysa scene that, in my humble opinion, cannot be entirely explained away by the location. Dany's scenes in the second half of Season 3 covered only one of her chapters in ASOS, Daenerys 4. Pacing continues to suffer from it, as Dany randomly hops on screen for one scene and then disappears for the rest of the episode. I don't think it can reasonably be explained with her only having 6 chapters in ASOS. In fact, I hadn't realized that she only had 6 chapters there until I started doing this video. I always assumed there's more, and I hadn't seen it mentioned elsewhere, while her having only 5 chapters in Clash is a well-known fact to most of the fans. I think that you do not get this impression with Storm chapters because so much happens in them. It's all very fast-paced, and there's a lot of cool action sequences that leave a heavier mark on the third installment of the saga than Dany's time in Curve, where the most action-packed chapter is the Undying One. But the show does not utilize the richness of Dany's Storm storyline to its full capacity. We have had so many instances of long, exposition-heavy scenes getting cut, condensed, or substituted with far less engaging scenes. This is an obvious mistake, since as mentioned previously, the early scenes of Game of Thrones have been carried by the dialogue, and that aspect is lacking from Dany's storyline, with way too many of her scenes getting cut for no apparent reason, while other characters not only retain their book scenes, but they also get some new ones. We now move on to Daenerys 5 and Daenerys 6, chapters of ASOS which were covered by Season 4. Are you surprised to see the title cards say Season 4 as opposed to being divided into episodes like previously? Well, let me explain myself. I was under the impression that about half of Season 4 still covers A Storm of Swords, while the second half of the season is already venturing into A Dance with Dragons. That isn't really true. Dany appears in 8 out of 10 episodes of Season 4, and most of those are still scenes from Storm. Because the problem we spoke of persists. Daenerys appears in one short scene, then disappears for the rest of the episode. It's quite jarring because the showrunners shoot themselves in the foot. While they did try to expand this story by adding some scenes that weren't in the book, they also made their job all that more difficult by not only simplifying the storyline, but also by cutting long scenes heavy with dialogue. The biggest examples of this is dropping the subplot of Barristan being in disguise, as well as abandoning Stormcrows and making Daario a second son, which made them kill Mero, which made them skip Mero trying to kill Daenerys, which in turn did not lead to the satisfying resolution to Jorah's spying and Barristan's reveal. Yes, I know, not everything in the book can make it onto the screen, but somehow it was Dany's storyline that was impacted by this the most. And the expansions of Dany's storyline were done lazily and sloppily most of the time, while the expansions of other characters' storylines were elaborate and satisfying most of the time. Now to the actual analysis. Like in the books, Daenerys encounters a crucified slave child pointing the way to Meereen. Except in the books, the slave children are additionally disemboweled, and we do not learn that the slavers burned and harvested everything before they secluded themselves in Meereen. Since Belvas was cut, the task of defeating the champion of Meereen falls on Daario. I have to say I like this actor more than the previous one, though I wish they dyed his beard and hair. Daario defeats the champion and Dany makes a speech to the slaves of Meereen, urging them to seize their own freedom. I have no idea how anyone was able to hear what the hell was she saying, but that's a nitpick. And it does turn out that the freedmen are following Daenerys, so I retract my previous statement about that. They wheel out the trebuchets and send the broken collars into Meereen. A symbolic gesture not in the books, since in the books they can't build trebuchets due to slavers burning all the trees, But I'm glad it was included as a call to action for the slaves themselves. Otherwise, not a lot is changed in the first 2 episodes Dany appears in, aside from Book Jorah once more urging Daenerys to give up her conquest of Slaver's Bay. Perhaps we can starve the city out. Ser Jorah looked unhappy. We'll starve long before they do, Your Grace. There's no food here, nor fodder for our mules and horses. I do not like this river water either. Meereen shits into the Kahadazan, but draws its drinking water from deep wells. Already we've had reports of sickness in the camps, fever and brown leg and 3 cases of the bloody flags. There will be more if we remain. These slaves are weak from the march. Freedmen, Dany corrected. They are slaves no longer. Slave or free, they are hungry, and they will soon be sick. The city is better provisioned than we are, and can be resupplied by water. Your 3 ships are not enough to deny them access to both the river and the sea. Then what do you advise, Ser Jorah? You will not like it. I would hear it all the same. As you wish. I say, let this city be. You cannot free every slave in the world, Khaleesi. The war is in Westeros. I have not forgotten Westeros. Dany dreamt of it some nights, this fabled land that she had never seen. If I let Meereen's old brick walls defeat me so easily, though, how will I ever take the great stone castles of Westeros? I second it, Ser Jorah said, with fire. By the time we reach the 7 kingdoms, your dragons will be grown. And we will have siege towers and trebuchets as well, all the things we lack here. But the way across the lands of the long summer is long and grueling, and there are dangers we cannot know. You stopped at Astapor to buy an army, not to start a war. Save your spears and swords for the 7 kingdoms, my queen. Leave Meereen to the Meereenese, and march west for Pentos. Dany set great store by Ser Jorah's counsel, but to leave Meereen untouched was more than she could stomach. She could not forget the children on their posts, the birds staring at their entrails, their skinny arms pointing up the coast road. Ser Jorah, you say we have no food left. If I march west, how can I feed my freedmen? You can't. I am sorry, Khaleesi. They must feed themselves or starve. Many and more will die along the march, yes. That will be hard, but there is no way to save them. We need to put the scorched earth well behind us. Dany had left a trail of corpses behind her when she crossed the Red Waste. It was a sight she never meant to see again. No, she said. I will not march my people off to die. My children. There must be some way into this city. Another thing that was cut was an assassination attempt on Dany, which ended up exposing Arstan as Varystan and Jorah as an ex-spy. By the time Mormont arrived, she was huddled in her lion pelt, drinking a cup of spice wine. I had a look at the river wall, Ser Jorah started. It's a few feet higher than the others, and just as strong. And the Meereenese have a dozen firehawks tied up beneath the ramparts. She cut him off. You might have warned me that the Titan's bastard had escaped. He frowned. I saw no need to frighten you, Your Grace. I have offered a reward for his head. Pay it to Whitebird. Mero has been with us all the way from Yunkai. He shaved his beard off and lost himself amongst the freedmen, waiting for a chance for vengeance. Arstan killed him. Ser Jorah gave the old man a long look. A squire with a stick slew Mero of Bravos. Is that the way of it? A stick, Dany confirmed. But no longer a squire. Ser Jorah, it's my wish that Arslan be knighted. No. The loud refusal was surprise enough. Stranger still, it came from both men at once. Ser Jorah drew his sword. The Titan's bastard was a nasty piece of work, and good at killing. Who are you, old man? A better knight than you, sir, Arslan said coldly. Knight? Dany was confused. You said you were a squire. I was, Your Grace. He dropped to one knee. I squired for Lord Swan in my youth, and at Magister's Illyria's behest I have served strong Belfast as well. But during the years between, I was a knight in Westeros. I have told you no lies, my queen, yet there are truths I have withheld, and for that, and all my other sins, I can only beg your forgiveness. What truths have you withheld? Dany did not like this. You will tell me, now! He bowed his head. At Carf, when you asked my name, I said I was called Arstan. That much was true. Many people had called me that name while Belvas and I were making our way east to find you. But it is not my true name. She was more confused than angry. He has played me false, just as Jorah warned me. Yet he saved my life just now. Ser Jorah flushed red. Mero shaved his beard. But you grew one, didn't you? No wonder you looked so bloody familiar. You know him? And I asked the exile knight. Lost. I saw him perhaps a dozen times, from afar most often, standing with his brothers or riding in some tourney. But every man in the Seven Kingdoms knew Barristan the Bold. He laid the point of his sword against the old man's neck. Khaleesi, before you kneels Sir Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, who betrayed your house to serve the usurper, Robert Baratheon. The old knight did not so much as blink. The crow calls the raven black, and you speak of betrayal. Why are you here? Danny demanded of him. If Robert sent you to kill me, why did you just save my life? He served the usurper. He betrayed Rhaegar's memory, and abandoned Viserys to live and die in exile. Yet if he wanted me dead, he need only have stood aside. I want the whole truth now, on your honor as knights. Are you the usurper's man, or mine? Yours, if you will have me. Sir Barristan had tears in his eyes. I took Robert's pardon, aye. I served him in King's Guard and Council, served with the Kingslayer and others near as bad, who sold the white cloak I wore. Nothing will excuse that. I might be serving in King's Landing still, if the vile boy upon the Iron Throne had not cast me aside, it shames me to admit. But when he took the cloak that the White Bull had draped about my shoulders, and sent men to kill me that self-same day, it was as though he'd ripped a coal off my eyes. That was when I knew I must find my true king, and die in his service. I can grant that wish, Ser Jorah said darkly. Quiet, said Dany. I will hear him out. It may be that I must die a traitor's death, Sir Barristan said. If so, I should not die alone. Before I took Robert's pardon, I fought against him on the Trident. You were on the other side of that battle, Mormont, were you not? He did not wait for an answer. Your Grace, I am sorry I misled you. It was the only way to keep the Lannisters from learning that I had joined you. You are watched, as your brother was. Lord Varys reported every move Viserys made, for years. Whilst I sat on the small council, I heard 100 such reports. And since the day you wed Khal Drogo, there has been an informer by your side, selling your secrets, trading whispers to the Spider for gold and promises. He cannot mean. You are mistaken. Then he looked at Jorah Mormont. Tell him he's mistaken. There's no informer. Ser Jorah, tell him. We crossed the Dothraki Sea together, and the Red Waste. Her heart fluttered like a bird in a trap. Tell him, Jorah. Tell him how he got it wrong. The others take you, Selmy. Ser Jorah flung his long sword to the carpet. Khaleesi, it was only at the start, before I came to know you, before I came to love. Do not say that word! She backed away from him. How could you? What did the usurper promise you? Gold, was it gold? The Undying had said she would be betrayed twice more, once for gold and once for love. Tell me, what were you promised? Varys said I might go home. He bowed his head. How was going to take you home? Her dragons sensed her fury. Viserion roared, and smoke rose grey from his snout. Drogon bat the air with black wings, and Rhaegal twisted his head back and belched flame. I should say the word and burn the two of them. Was there no one she could trust, no one to keep her safe? Are all the knights of Westeros so false as you two? Get out before my dragons roast you both. What does Roselier smell like? As full as Brown Ben's severs? Go! Sir Barristan rose, stiff and slow. For the first time, he looked his age. Where shall we go, your grace? To hell! To serve King Robert! Then he felt hot tears on her cheeks. Drogon screamed, lashing his tail back and forth. The others can have you both. Go away forever, both of you. The next time I see your faces, I will have your traitors' heads off. She could not say the words, though. They betrayed me, but they saved me. But they lied. You go. My bear, my fierce, strong bear. What will I do without him? And the old man, my brother's friend. You go. Where? And then she knew. This proves that dropping Barristan's disguise was a mistake, as it robbed us of this very strong scene, where all three actors would have shown their range, as well as some other crucial reason as to why Barristan initially kept his identity a secret, which will be revealed later. Oathkeeper opens with Missandei teaching the common tongue to Grey Worm. This is the beginning of their romance, which did not happen in the books, as Missandei and Grey Worm never interacted there. She is an 11-year-old child, and he is an adult. While I did not necessarily like aging Missandei up, I do like this inclusion, though I seem to recall that this was not the general consensus back when the show was airing, and many thought this relationship unnecessary. I think there is a lot of subtle beauty in it. Two people, physically and mentally scarred by the horrific system of slavery, denied their very personhood, reclaiming their bodies and feelings as free people. A big shame that all of this gets undermined just to have Missandei murdered in chains in season 2 for nothing but shock value. But at the time, it was positively surprising how considerate and well thought out this relationship was. It's also really cute to see Daenerys acting as a wingman. While the actual taking of Meereen happens off-screen in A Storm of Swords, we see it in the show, since we are not limited to Dany's eyes. The plan is slightly different. Rather than to send Jorah and Barristan into Meereen via the Severs, it's Grey Worm and his Unsullied that sneak into the city, arm the slaves and convince them to rebel. A graffiti in the common tongue appears on the wall, saying "Kill the Masters," which is a bit silly, given they all speak Valyrian, but understandable given the message they wanted to convey. It also could be that it was Grey Worm who wrote it there, since he said this phrase at the beginning of the episode. This graffiti will later become important as we move on to Season 5, so let's put a pin on it for now. The slaver looks up and sees that the Harpy of Meereen is now wrapped in the Targaryen sigil, and he gets attacked by the slaves. The revolt turns out to be a success, but the glorious moment would soon be undercut by Daenerys doing her big, madness foreshadowing moment of crucifying the slavers of Meereen in retaliation for their crucifixion of 163 children. Daenerys faces opposition from Barristan, which she cannot voice in the books since she hadn't yet made amends with him, but he is not seen referencing the poor, innocent slavers in later conversations, nor in his POV in Dance, so we can assume that book Barristan did not care. Barristan's opposition is there because the showrunners don't believe that Daenerys should have done this, which will become evident once Hizdahr comes into the picture, and once the showrunners have Tyrion compare poor innocent slavers to Holocaust victims. Most of the fandom follows through, claiming that this act proves that she is biologically wired towards madness. We will return to the crucifixion in a short while. Daenerys looks triumphant at her newly conquered city, whereas in the books she has the following thoughts. Meereen had a score of lesser pyramids, but none stood even half as tall. From here she could see the whole city, the narrow twisty alleys and wide brick streets, the temples and granaries, hovels and palaces, brothels and baths, gardens and fountains, the great red circles of the fighting pits. And beyond the walls was the Pefter Sea, the winding Skahazadan, the dry brown hills, burnt orchards, and blackened fields. Up here in her garden, Dany sometimes felt like a god, living atop the highest mountain in the world. Do all gods feel so lonely? Some must surely. When she was dressed, Missandei brought her a polished silver glass so she could see how she looked. Dany stared at herself in silence. Is this the face of a conqueror? So far as she could tell, she still looked like a little girl. I understand that show Daenerys is older and is played by an older actress, but by my estimation she is about 19 in the show now. Still very young, and still can have the impression that, in the grand scheme of things, she is just a girl. This continues the pattern of undermining her book personality, which is very much that of a young girl at the brink of adulthood. Still a bit whimsical, still a bit unsure of her role in the world, still vulnerable. A bright, shining child queen, as Barristan calls her in A Dance with Dragons. And we know that Emilia fought to have this aspect of Daenerys preserved in the adaptation, so it's disheartening to know that it was a possibility that ultimately got disregarded. In First of His Name, Dany learns of Joffrey's death, Tommen's coronation, and Second Sons taking the Meereenese navy at Darius' instigation, which her advisors argue are signs to attack Westeros. News arrives that the Masters retook Yunkai and re-enslaved everyone who stayed behind, as well as the fall of Astapor. Dany seems rather distraught by the news, but in front of Jorah, she keeps a facade of stoicism and strength. Jorah urges her to leave Slaver's Bay behind, but Dany points out that if she cannot control Slaver's Bay, she cannot hope to rule Westeros, and thus decides to stay in Meereen. In the books, Dany's decision to stay in Meereen has additional reasons. That morning she summoned her captains and commanders to the garden, rather than descending to the audience chamber. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood to Westeros, but afterward he gave them peace, prosperity and justice. But all I have brought to Slaver's Bay is death and ruin. I have been more Khaldan queen, smashing and plundering, than moving on. There is nothing to stay for, said Brownbone Plum. Your Grace, the slavers brought their doom on themselves, said Daario Naharis. You have brought freedom as well, Missandei pointed out. Freedom to starve, asked Dany sharply. Freedom to die. Am I a dragon or a harpy? Am I mad? Do I have detained? A dragon, Sir Barristan said with certainty. Meereen is not Westeros, Your Grace. But how can I rule 7 kingdoms if I cannot rule a single city? He had no answer to that. Then he turned away from them to gaze out over the city once again. My children need time to heal and learn. My dragons need time to grow and test their wings. And I need the same. I will not let this city go the way of Astapor. I will not let the harpy of Yunkai chain up those I freed all over again. She turned back to look at their faces. I will not march. What will you do then, Khaleesi? Asked Carroll. Stay, she said. Rule. And be a queen. In the book dialogue, Dany is visibly more self-critical than show Daenerys. Note her comparing herself to a Khal in a derogatory way and verbally acknowledging the mistakes she's made during her campaign, as well as her internal worries about the taint of madness. I also suspect that the assertion that Daenerys only stayed in Meereen to try out being a queen, as opposed to genuinely wishing to make it a free city, might result from the lack of these crucial insights. Additionally, the information about the fall of Astapor is relayed to us via an envoy Gael, and there are lines of dialogue that highlight Missandei's intelligence. Great Cleon exposed their plots and hacked their heads off with a cleaver, and the grateful folk of Astapor have crowned him for his valor. Noble Gael, said Missandei in the dialect of Astapor. Is this the same Cleon once owned by Grazdan Mo Ulhor? Her voice was gullous, yet the question plainly made the envoy anxious. The same, he admitted. A great man. Missandei leaned close to Dany. He was a butcher in Grazdan's kitchen, the girl whispered in her ear. It was said he could slaughter a pig faster than any man in Astapor. Astapor remembers. Astapor will not forsake you. To prove his faith, Great Cleon offers to sell your alliance with a marriage. A marriage? To me? Gal smiled. His teeth were brown and rotten. Great Cleon will give you many strong sons. Dany found herself bereft of words, but little Missandei came to her rescue. Did his first wife give him sons? The envoy looked at her unhappily. Great Cleon has 3 daughters by his first wife. 2 of his newer wives are with child, but he means to put all of them aside if the Mother of Dragons will consent to wed him. In the laws of gods and men, Drogon burns some goats and a herder visits the Great Pyramid to petition Daenerys about it. And here I want to show everyone something very interesting. Mark Simonetti is one of the official artists for A Song of Ice and Fire, having contributed his work to A World of Ice and Fire and the calendar for 2013. He was in charge of creating the artwork, which ended up on the cover for the Brazilian edition of A Dance with Dragons. But George had some reservations about the first version he's created. On the A Dance with Dragons cover, I put Daenerys at the top of the stairs of the Meereenese pyramid. I had probably been, unknowingly, influenced by the series. George told me that Daenerys wants equality for everyone. She wants to be at the same level as her people, so I had her climb down to keep it consistent. It's especially one bit that's worth discussing in the context of our series. The part about how Mark himself acknowledged that he must have been influenced by the show when he drew Daenerys at the top of the stairs, and that it was not something conscious on his part either. This shows that often we are not even aware of how the adaptations impact our perception of the source material. Sure, all of us remember some bigger changes from the books to the show, but the more subtle ones often go under the radar. If you ever wonder why I even bother to rant about some minuscule details nobody else cares about, this is why. Something seemingly as insignificant as set design did affect at least one person's perception of Daenerys as a whole and undermined a core aspect of her characterization, her wish for equality for everyone. From this, it's very easy to jump into, she doesn't actually want to free the slaves, she just wants to be worshipped by them. But this is something you can also unlearn, though you need to put conscious effort into it, draw a hard line between the two mediums, and, preferably, not rewatch Game of Thrones. In any case, Daenerys receives the man who had his goat burned with warmth and courtesy.
Zugagondaor nuchis archires. Yetar bochashkot niesha shetra.
Skang ma fich prash pa ovresh nietal. Wegnietang marinio pashkish.
He is a goat herd. He says he prayed for your victory against the slave masters. I thank him for his prayers. Dar Daenerys akrimosh.
Tashpa saldrijesh, nietal. We saldrijesh. Mashish kiznie konyaklo?
It was your dragons, he says. They came this morning for his flock. He hopes he has not offended your grace, but now he has nothing. Tell this man I am sorry for his hardship. I cannot bring back his goats. But I will see he has paid their value 3 times over.
Grimoire. Osiris, Grimoire. Grimoire. Grimoire.
Surely the behavior of an evil genocidal Mad Queen. Anyway, the thing I want to note in this scene is that in the books, Daenerys does not need a translator when she deals with supplicants. I'm pretty sure that the Myrinese speak a bastard form of Valyrian that was influenced by the old Giscari tongue, which is now mostly forgotten. Thus, it would not be that difficult for her to understand what he's saying. She had no trouble communicating with the slaves previously. Why does she need translation now? Surely, Missandei's character can be utilized in a better way, given that her 11-year-old self in the books advises Daenerys on taxes and Giscari customs. And then we reach the infamous Hisdar Gate.
Jere de siarsa, Hisdar Zolarak, Pindas me jere jidare.
Hedesiar zar Hisdar Zolorak sirginot sit inot vestegon costas.
Queen Daenerys, tales of your beauty were not exaggerated.
I thank you.
Mine is one of the oldest and proudest families in Meereen.
Then it is my honor to receive you.
My father, one of Meereen's most respected and beloved citizens, oversaw the restoration and maintenance of its greatest landmarks, this pyramid included.
For that, he has my gratitude. I should be honored to meet him.
You have, Your Grace. You crucified him. I pray you'll never live to see a member of your family treated so cruelly.
Your father crucified innocent children.
My father spoke out against crucifying those children. He decried it as a criminal act, but was overruled. Is it justice to answer one crime with another?
I am sorry you no longer have a father, but my treatment of the masters was no crime. You'd be wise to remember that.
What's done is done. You are the queen, and I am a servant of Meereen, a servant who does not wish to see its traditions eradicated.
And what traditions do you speak of?
The tradition of funeral rite, proper burial in the Temple of the Graces. My father and 162 noble Meereenese are still nailed to those posts, carrion for vultures, rotting in the sun. Your Grace, I ask that you order these men taken down so that they might receive proper burials.
And what of the slave children these noble Meereenese crucified? They were rotting in the sun as well. Would you have begged me for their right to a proper burial?
Your Grace, I cannot defend the actions of the masters. I can only speak to you as a son who loved his father. Let me take his body down. Let me have him brought to the temple and buried with dignity so that he might find peace in the next world.
Bury your father.
Thank you, my queen.
You may or may not remember that nothing of this sort happened in the books. For all we know, Hisdar's father is probably still alive, and there is no subplot of Daenerys wrongly convicting anyone for the responsibility in the murder of these children. In the plaza before the Great Pyramid, the Myrinese huddled forlorn. The great masters had looked anything but great in the morning light. Stripped of their jewels and their fringed dockers, they were contemptible. A herd of old men with shivered balls and spotted skin, and young men with ridiculous hair. Their women were either soft and fleshy, or as dry as old sticks, their face paint streaked by tears. I want your leaders, Dany told them. Give them up, and the rest of you shall be spared. How many? One old woman had asked, sobbing. How many must you have to spare us? 163, she answered. She had them nailed to wooden posts around the plaza, each man pointing at the next. The anger was fierce and hot inside her when she gave the command. It made her feel like an avenging dragon. But later, when she passed the men dying on the posts, when she heard their moans and smelled their bowels and blood, Dany put the glass aside, frowning. It was just. It was. I did it for the children. Once, you would often hear in this fandom about innocent slave masters that the evil Mad Queen crucified. But with time, the optics of such an argument became not great, to say the least, so people scrambled for other ways to make Daenerys' retaliation on the slavers, one that she subconsciously regrets even though she shouldn't, seem evil, bad, unhinged, or a sign of bad rulership, by claiming that she didn't bother investigating this crime, which means that she actually didn't get the people directly responsible, or that the slaving elite could have given her the least prominent members to protect themselves as a group. And I have zero doubt that this scene was what gave prominence to both of these arguments, because one logically follows from the other. If you see that the show made her accidentally kill a guy not responsible, then it's very easy to reach the next step. That means that someone could have gotten away with it. Neither of these arguments hold water. A blunder of this magnitude should have had major consequences, but these crucified slavers are basically never brought up again. A surprising development, given that so much fuss is made about the situation in the fandom. And, of course, there are people out there who claim that Dany crucified Hizdar's dad in the books as well. That shows even stronger how the adaptation can mix up our perception of the text. And once more, Missandei's importance is downplayed. It is her who advises Dany to have the slavers buried in the Giscari rites, not Hizdahr. "Your Grace," said Missandei, "Giscari interred the honored dead in crypts below their manses. If you would boil the bones clean and return them to their kin, it would be a kindness. The widows will curse me all the same. Let it be done." Always funny to see people kiss the feet of Stannis Baratheon for his harsh justice is justice stance, but for Dany, it's not only bad rulership, but also a sign of madness. And don't even get me started on this whole Hizdahr's dad was innocent bullshit. No, he wasn't. One does not reach the status and influence that the Lorax have by being a humble abolitionist. A slaver who opposed one bad thing is still a slaver who profited off of a system of mass murder and dehumanization. There really is no way to verify if Hizdahr is speaking the truth either. A smarter show could have made this a sign of his manipulation and later revealed that his father didn't oppose shit and that he made this argument to make her doubt herself and her decision-making capabilities, which would in turn make her rule of Meereen milder and less firm, as is the case in A Dance with Dragons. But the show was in earnest portraying Hizdahr's dad as a victim, an innocent slave master later alluded to in Season 8, because Benioff and Weiss were reading fan forums to aid themselves with writing the scripts, and saw people claim that this was bad, so they followed suit and made it worse than it was in the books. Where, as I stress, this crucifixion is essentially forgotten by the narrative, because it really is not as big of a deal as it is made out to be. You don't actually want me to say out loud what I think Daenerys should have done. But whatever the case, they also did a bad job, because this Mad Queen in the making is actually seen regretting what happened to Hizdahr's pappy and showed him grace. I wonder how many times Aerys felt bad about burning people alive. In any case, people who desperately want to condemn Dany for this act really expect her to establish the ICC and spend months, if not years, investigating who exactly was responsible, which is anachronistic and plainly impossible. It's, once again, expecting Daenerys to have 21st century morality and sensibilities, while not expecting anything of this sort from other characters. This exchange will actually have an enormous impact on how the relationship between Hizdahr and Dany was adapted, so keep it in mind for the final part. In Mockingbird, Daario sneaks into Dany's chambers to complain about having nothing to do in Meereen, since the only thing he's good at is killing and having sex. Daario confesses his feelings for Daenerys and asks her to give him something to do. Dany orders him to undress. Later in this episode, Daario leaves her chambers and meets Jorah, telling him that Dany is in a good mood, implying that they spent the night together. Once more, Jorah is shown as genuinely hurt by his affections not being returned, and her as heartless and cold. The Jorah who, in the books, is exiled at this point, who was grooming her and who sexually assaulted her. But for the record, even in the show context, Dany does not owe Jorah jack shit. Women do not owe relationships or romantic love to men solely because they're in love with them and they're nice to them. And the proverbial nice guys often turn out to be the worst of them all, as I think many women in the audience would agree. In any case, Daenerys and Daario do not become intimate until well into A Dance with Dragons. It lasts a very short time, and Dany cuts it short herself, because she knows that she cannot trust Daario. Something conveniently forgotten whenever this relationship is discussed, no doubt another show residue, where she is shown as far more careless in her romantic exploits. Jorah warns Dany against Daario, and once more, it's not a matter of jealousy or grooming, but genuine concern. Dany then says that she sent Daario and the Second Sons to retake Yunkai and execute all the slave masters. And the show goes on full-throated defense of slavery.
That is why I've ordered Dario to execute every master in Yunkai. The masters tear babies from their mother's arms. They mutilate little boys by the thousands. They train little girls in the art of pleasuring old men. They treat men like beasts, as you said yourself.
Herding the masters into pens and slaughtering them by the thousands is also treating men like beasts. The slaves you freed, brutality is all they've ever known. If you want them to know something else, you'll have to show it to them.
And repay the slavers with what? Kindness? A fine? A stern warning?
It's tempting to see your enemies as evil, all of them. But there's good and evil on both sides in every war ever fought.
Let the priests argue over good and evil. Slavery is real. I can end it, I will end it, and I will end those behind it.
I sold men into slavery, Khaleesi.
And now, you are helping me show them to freedom.
I wouldn't be here to help you if Ned Stark had done to me what you want to do to the masters of Yunkai.
The man who came to me the other day about burying his father.
Hizdahr Zol Lorak.
He will accompany the second sons and serve as my ambassador to Yunkai. He will tell the masters what has happened in Meereen. He will explain the choice they have before them. They can live in my new world, or they can die in their old one. We'll go and catch Dario before he leaves. Tell him I changed my mind.
Yes, Khaleesi.
No. Tell him you changed my mind.
And yes, the episode where they have this conversation was written by none other than Benioff and Weiss. In retrospect, there really is no surprise that they considered Dany killing slavers as madness. It's no surprise they wanted to do a show where the Confederacy won. These signs have always been there, as early as the Still Good and Faithful to the Source Material Season 4. You may even say it was foreshadowed. Whether they reached the conclusion that there are good and innocent slave masters themselves, or they were just repeating what they saw on fan forums, is a mystery. In any case, millions of people saw this sentiment in the most popular TV show in history. Jorah selling people into slavery is shown as just a whoopsie, and not a mindset that would prevent him from becoming an abolitionist, and thus unable to discuss this issue in good faith, since he is the one shown to be in the right in this conversation. The man who has an agenda in pushing the "some slavers are good" sentiment. The show Game of Thrones tells us that there are good slave masters who deserve to be spared, and you just have to endlessly compromise and show good faith to people who treated other people with such violence for centuries. The funniest thing about it is that it is in stark contrast to the beliefs of the author. You know I never held much with slavery, even if I never done much against it neither. I would've, but those damned abolitionists were such Bible thumpers. Only I've been thinking, and it seems to me maybe they was right after all. You can't just go, using another kind of people, like they wasn't people at all. Know what I mean? Got to end, sooner or later. Better if it ends peaceful, but it's got to end, even if it has to be with fire and blood, you see? Maybe that's what them abolitionists been saying all along. You try to be reasonable, that's only right. But if it don't work, you got to be ready. Some things is just wrong. They got to be ended. And this is the conclusion Dany reaches by the end of A Dance with Dragons. After a full book of endless compromise. She would never say something like this at this point of the story. To be fair, I don't ever see her saying something like this in the book either. But not having her this growth from "I can compromise" to "it has to end with fire and blood" makes it so that her entire A Dance with Dragons arc becomes unadaptable, which explains the mess it was made into in Season 5. Dany's moral absolutism in this instance is shown as incorrect and even deranged, even though it's fucking slavery we talk about. It should not surprise us to see the fandom speak like Confederates if so many of them ventured into the books from the show, where they were explicitly told that this is the case. Some slave owners are good, some slave owners are innocent. And I'm sorry, but Daenerys is 100% right in this scene. Of course, she is not right in the context of the show, where the decision she made at Dario's instigation is questioned and ultimately abandoned, and later her violence towards those who oppressed was used as fuel to her decision to slaughter thousands of innocent people. The show underplayed the violence that the status quo enacted on thousands, if not millions of people, while clutching pearls at revolutionary violence. Now I don't think it was a coincidence that the unsullied training was made less brutal in the show and the cruelty of slavers downplayed. Additionally, Daenerys is shown as being tempered and controlled by the men in her council, who always urge her towards moderation, and that without them she would be endlessly violent and uncompromising. Of course, this also undermines the Mad Queen plot, since a mad, ruthless tyrant wouldn't listen to any councillors but the yes-men. But that is in stark contrast to the books. The people in her council actually urge her towards being more violent, but she fears being violent and fears the taint of madness. Take Skahas, for example, who urges her to execute the hostages, but she is reduced to tears at the mere prospect and refuses to do so. So, if you ever wonder why so often you see people claim that Tyrion will be easily able to manipulate Daenerys into violence, you know from where did this claim sprout for. From show Daenerys being borderline controlled by her council, who keep her impulses in check. If they can do that, then Tyrion can exploit those, non-existent in the books, impulses, for his own gain. But the opposite is true. Dany trusts her councillors, but not completely, and often did the opposite to what they urged her to do, to good results. A small side note, this is her best costume in the whole show. Last thing we're going to tackle is the revelation of Jorah's spying, which happens in the Mountain and the Viper. In the show, Barristan learns of it from a letter pardoning Jorah, as opposed to knowing of this all along when in disguise, having heard Jorah's reports as he was sitting in the small council. Then Daenerys confronts Jorah about it. Before we compare the books and the show, let's see the cut conversation between Dany and Barristan, whom she confronts before Jorah. We can't have this conversation because we didn't have Barristan disguised as Arstan. She turned to Sir Barristan. You protected my father for many years, fought beside my brother on the Trident, but you abandoned Viserys in his exile, and bent your knee to the usurper instead. Why? And tell it true. Some truths are hard to hear. Robert was, a good knight. Chivalrous, brave. He spared my life, and the lives of many others. Prince Viserys was only a boy. It would have been years before he was fit to rule, and forgive me, my queen, but you ask for truth. Even as a child, your brother Viserys oft seemed to be his father's son, in ways that Rhaegar never did. His father's son, Dany frowned. What does that mean? The old knight did not blink. Your father is called the Mad King in Westeros. Has no one ever told you? Viserys did. The Mad King. The usurper called him that. The usurper and his dogs. The Mad King. It was a lie. Why ask for truth? Sir Barristan said softly. If you close your ears to it. He hesitated, then continued. I told you before that I used a false name, so the Lannisters would not know that I joined you. That was less than half of it, your grace. The truth is, I wanted to watch you for a time, before pledging you my sword. To make certain that you were not my father's daughter. If she was not her father's daughter, who was she? Mad, he finished. But I see no taint in you. Taint? Dany bristled. I am no maester to quote history at you, your grace. Swords have been my life, not books. But every child knows that the Targaryens have always danced too close to madness. Your father was not the first. King Jaehaerys once told me that madness and greatness are two sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, he said, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Jaehaerys, this old man, knew my grandfather. The thought gave her pause. Most of what she knew of Westeros had come from her brother, and the rest from Ser Jorah. Sir Barristan would have forgotten more than the two of them had ever known. This man can tell me what I came from. So I am a coin in the hands of some god. Is that what you are saying, sir? No, Sir Barristan replied. You are the true-born heir of Westeros. To the end of my days, I shall remain your faithful knight, should you find me worthy to bear a sword again. If not, I am content to serve strong Belvas as his squire. What if I decide you're only worthy to be my fool? Dany asked scornfully. Or perhaps my cook. I would be honored, your grace, Sammy said with quiet dignity. I can bake apples and boil beef as well as any man, and I've roasted many a duck over a campfire. I hope you like them greasy, with charred skin and bloody bones. That made her smile. I would have to be mad to eat such fare. Ben Plum, come give Sir Barristan your longsword, but Whitebird would not take it. I flung my sword at Joffrey's feet, and have not touched one since. Only from the hand of my queen will I accept the sword again. As you wish. Dany took the sword from Brown Ben and offered it hilt first. The old man took it reverently. Now kneel, she told him, and swear it to my service. Like I said, the showrunners shot themselves in the foot when they didn't bother to have Barristan wear a disguise. It robbed us of yet another strong scene that would have improved the pacing, as well as Barristan only choosing to serve Dany after he saw her for himself. Now on to Jorah.
Why did the usurper pardon you?
If we could speak alone.
No. Speak to me here. Explain it to me.
Who do you think sent this to Meereen? Who profits? This is the work of Tywin Lannister. He wants to divide us. If we're fighting each other, we're not fighting him.
The pardon was signed the year we met. Why were you pardoned? Unless you're saying this document was forged?
It is not forged.
Why then?
I sent letters to Varys, the spy master of King's Landing.
What was the content of these letters?
Information.
What information?
When you and Viserys arrived in Pentos, his plan to marry you to Khal Drogo when you were married, when your brother died.
You told them I was carrying Drogo's child? Yes or no?
Khaleesi.
Don't call me that. Did you tell them I was carrying Drogo's child?
Yes.
That wine merchant tried to poison me because of your information.
I stopped you from drinking his wine.
Because you knew it was poisoned.
I suspected.
You betrayed me. From the first.
Forgive me. I never meant. Please, Khaleesi, forgive.
You sold my secrets to the man who killed my father and stole my brother's throne. You want me to forgive you.
I have loved you.
Love? How can you say that to me? Any other man I would have you executed, but you, I do not want you in my city, dead or alive. Go back to your masters in King's Landing. Collect your pardon, if you can.
Daenerys, please.
Don't ever presume to touch me again or speak my name. You have until dusk to collect your things and leave this city. If you're found in Meereen past break of day, I'll have your head thrown into Slaver's Bay.
And now you, sir. Tell me true. The big man's neck was red. Whether from anger or shame, she did not know. I have tried to tell you true. 100 times. I told you Arstan was more than he seemed. I warned you that Xaro and Pietri were not to be trusted. I warned you. You warned me against everyone except yourself. His insolence angered her. He should be humbler. He should beg my forgiveness. Trust no one but Jorah Mormont, you said. And all the time you were the spider's creature. I am no man's creature. I took the eunuch's gold, yes. I learned some ciphers and wrote some letters, but that was all. All! You spied on me and sold me to my enemies. For a time, he said grudgingly. I stopped. When? When did you stop? I made one report from Karth, but... From Karth? Then I had been hoping it had ended much earlier. What did you write from Karth? That you were my man now? That you wanted no more of their schemes? Jorah could not meet her eyes. When Khal Drogo died, you asked me to go with you to Yiti and the Jade Sea. Was that your wish or Robert's? That was to protect you, he insisted. To keep you away from them. I knew what snakes they were. Snakes! And what are you, sir? Something unspeakable occurred to her. You told them I was carrying Drogo's child. Khaleesi. Do not think to deny it, sir, Sir Barristan said sharply. I was there when the eunuch told the council, and Robert decreed that her grace and her child must die. You were the source, sir. There was even talk that you might do the deed, for a pardon. A lie. Sir Jorah's face darkened. I would never. Daenerys, it was me who stopped you from drinking the wine. Yes. And how was it you knew the wine was poisoned? I but suspected. The caravan brought a letter from Varys. He warned me there would be attempts. He wanted you watched, yes, but not harmed. He went to his knees. If I had not told them, someone else would have. You know that. I know you betrayed me. She touched her belly, where her son Rhaego had perished. I know a poisoner tried to kill my son, because of you. That's what I know. No, he shook his head. I never meant. Forgive me, you have to forgive me. Have to? It was too late. He should have begun by begging forgiveness. She could not pardon him as she'd intended. She had dragged the wine cellar behind her horse until there was nothing left of him. Didn't the man who brought him deserve the same? This is Jorah, my fierce bear, the right arm that never failed me. I would be dead without him, but... I can't forgive you, she said. I can't. You forgave the old man. He lied to me about his name. You sold my secrets to the man who killed my father and stole my brother's throne. I protected you. I fought for you, killed for you. Kissed me, she thought. betrayed me. I went down into the severs like a rat, for you. It might have been kinder if you'd died there. Denis said nothing. There was nothing to say. Daenerys, he said, I have loved you, and there it was. 3 reasons will you know, once for blood, and once for gold, and once for love. The gods do nothing without a purpose, they say. You did not die in battle, so it must be they still have some use for you. But I don't. I will not have you near me. You are banished, sir. Go back to your masters in King's Landing and collect your pardon, if you can. Or to Astapor. No doubt the Butcher King needs knights. No, he reached for her. Daenerys, please hear me. She slapped his hand away. Do not ever presume to touch me again, or to speak my name. You have until dawn to collect your things and leave this city. If you're found in Meereen past break of day, I will have strong Belvas twist your head off. I will, believe that. She turned her back on him, her skirt swelling. I cannot bear to see his face. Remove this liar from my sight, she commanded. I must not weep. I must not. If I weep, I will forgive him. Show Daenerys is angry as opposed to completely heartbroken. Overall, this scene is far more emotionally charged in the books. The line of "don't touch me ever again" would have been much stronger if he did indeed assault her, but that didn't happen. And also, because he was so whitewashed, we do feel sorry for him in this scene, as opposed to being disgusted by him. Also, Book Jorah tries to shift the blame from himself and excuse himself much more. Jorah is also not shown to be a massive hypocrite because in the show, he was a good guy who was warning Daenerys about other people out of the goodness of his heart, and not because he wanted to isolate her, especially when he was the most dangerous man in her presence of them all. We also don't have this later. Your Grace. She turned to find Sir Barristan behind her. What more would you have of me, sir? I spared you, I took you into my service. Now give me some peace. Forgive me, Your Grace. It was only... Now that you know who I am... The old man hesitated. A knight of the King's Guard is in the King's presence day and night. For that reason, our vows require us to protect his secrets as we would his life. But your father's secrets by rights belong to you now, along with his throne, and... I thought perhaps you might have questions for me. Questions? She had 100 questions, 1,000, 10,000. Why couldn't she think of one? Was my father truly mad? She blurted out. Why do I ask that? Viserys said this talk of madness was a ploy of the usurpers. Viserys was a child, and the queen sheltered him as much as she could. Your father always had a little madness in him, I now believe. Yet he was charming and generous as well, so his lapses were forgiven. His reign began with such promise. But as the years passed, the lapses grew more frequent, until... Denis stopped him. Do I want to hear this now? Sir Barristan considered a moment. Perhaps not. Not now. Not now, she agreed. One day you must tell me all. The good and the bad. There is some good to be said of my father, surely. There is, Your Grace. Of him, and those who came before him. Your grandfather Jaehaerys and his brother, their father Aegon, your mother, and Rhaegar. Him most of all. I wish I could have known him. Her voice was wistful. I wish he could have known you, the old knight said. When you are ready, I will tell you all. Then I kissed him on the cheek and sent him on his way. And here we will conclude our analysis for Season 4 and this installment of the Book Was Show Dany series. Overall, I think Season 4 is much worse than Season 3, where I found some redeeming moments. Season 4 suffers from bad pacing and not so thinly veiled slavery apologia I'm unable to stomach. It also undermines Dany's arc in Season 5, as she is in Fire and Blood mode already, and as such there is no reason for her to have a realization that Fire and Blood is the only way to end oppressive systems. This has been thus far the most challenging video I have ever produced. It took me a lot of time to watch, rewatch, write and rewrite the script. I suspect it might not get a lot of views considering its length and that I got considerably less views for part 2 of the series than part 1. Nonetheless, it was incredibly rewarding and I think that the people who like this series will be satisfied with my findings as well. I was vindicated in the very thesis of this series of videos, that it wasn't in Season 5 that Daenerys started being misadapted and mischaracterized in the show. It has been there since the beginning. Dany's storyline was treated with neglect by the showrunners, who seemed plainly disinterested in it beyond surface-level badass moments. I've thrown them a bone whenever I could, but you know, there's only so much benefit of the doubt you could give someone. I have recently found myself wondering how could Daenerys be this mischaracterized in the fandom's collective consciousness if we, in theory, all read the same words on page? How come the Daenerys I know, the one who is sweet, affectionate, dedicated to justice and equality, is so different from the people for whom she is nothing but a deranged, violent and bloodthirsty tyrant? This is a conclusion you could only come to if you approach her storyline from preconceived notions about who she is or who she is destined to be. And, as I kept arguing in this video, the bulk of it comes from the show's mischaracterization of her. Unless you take actual effort, the words on page won't be overruled by your perception of her from the show, since we human beings are visual creatures. With this series of videos, I hope to help people in drawing this line between the two mediums. For season 3 and 4, we still do have most of the book plot points adapted. Season 5 is when we go completely off the rails, which will undermine yet another commonly repeated mantra, that the later seasons of Game of Thrones were bad because they've run out of books to adapt. As of now, thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share, so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. And remember, Phoenix rises from the ashes, and ashes always stand on top.